So here's the agenda for today. We've kind of broken up the meeting into two parts. First part would be our normal prioritization process that the board, new board members, this will be new to you. I think we reviewed this at CASB on how this would work. But for board members who have been with us, very similar process system. And then we'll have Heather lead us in some discussion items. Several for action, I would imagine, and then one that might be a little bit deeper and a longer discussion around, as we think about, as board members, you're positioning yourself in the community, as you're participating in committees and on school visits, how do we want to do that in a way where folks feel like they get the opportunities that they're seeking, and we do that in a way that everybody's good with. So, start off with the vision and mission. Not sure if we need to recite this or we can read this or you know what we're about. I think it gets very much clearer as we think about some of our strategic plan work, certainly our values. These are always things that we start with. And then what are we trying to do in regards to our strategic plan and the work of our district? Make sure that all kids benefit from challenging and relevant educational opportunities. Make sure that we're doing everything we can to give kids what they need to reduce disparities in achievement, and that when kids leave us, they're all empowered with the skills necessary for postgraduate success. So, I'd love to start with talking about last semester, the priorities that we set in board prioritization, and just a quick overview on how those went. I would say that we completed almost everything that we set out to complete in regards to the presentations and work sessions that we provided for the board. I would say that I have the phase 1, 2, 3 strategic plan initiatives in yellow because we haven't gotten to all the initiatives yet. That'll stay yellow until I feel like we're there. And then also our career and technical education update. We paused on that, and we're bringing that back this semester. And so that's one thing that we weren't able to do. And the indoor air quality we did hit at our last meeting, but feel like that we had, for the most part, and the CLDE programming overview, that's green, that should be yellow. That's coming to you all as a proposed topic for this semester. Any questions on fall 2021? The prioritization meeting helps us be so productive and helps everybody on my team get prepared and be on the same page in regards to what we want to do. So just really feel like this format has helped us be very productive in our work, regardless of the distractions that we've been seeing with COVID and the other tragedies we've been dealing with.
And there's no shame in having questions, so if you have them, just ask to make sure you're all on the same page as you go forward.
So what I'd like to do is talk about what I'm proposing in regards to what we're going to be taking on this semester. I've got some interesting color coding that I'll explain to you. Darker blue cells are things that are kind of continuing. The lighter blue cells are new topic we've discussed, but new topics for us to bring to the board. And those that are in orange are those that that I think are aligned directly to some of the strategic plan work that we're doing. So what I'd love to do is walk you through what I'm thinking for each one of these priorities, and then we can either come up and look at the board, or we can talk about it, whatever you all feel like would be the most effective, and then we can get into, Heather will talk us through a discussion on, are these the right things? Do we need more things? Do we need less things as we move forward for this semester? So, first and foremost, ongoing management of COVID-19. I think that as the board, as many of you know, Boulder County Public Health is meeting February 14th to talk about mask mandates in our community and the status. And after that, we're asking them to come to our meeting on the 22nd to talk about their recommendations for the school district. So this topic always is, if something is changing, I'll ask them to come and present and provide their recommendations to us. So that's ongoing management of COVID-19. Budget process will be active almost every month from here until June with different presentations. not only to this group, but also Bill and our team will be engaging many of our constituencies as we collect feedback for the budget. Strategic plan metrics we've planned for June with the rationale that towards the end of the year we'll have the most information to be able to present where we are with that. And so that is scheduled right now for June. We have a time allotted in May to meet with, to have a meeting with at least one city council this semester. Laura can fill us in a little bit on who that might be and where those talks are, because it may not fall directly on that date. I think in the past, when we met with Boulder City Council a few semesters back, we did something during the day. Some of the councils, we couldn't do it on our Tuesday meetings, but I know that Laura is working to schedule those. One of the topics that came up in our prioritization and... Oh, sorry. Yep. Yeah, so a few semesters back, board gave direction to really make sure that we're setting up time to speak with city councils. And so every semester we attempt to try to engage with either Superior, Lafayette, Louisville, Erie, Broomfield, Boulder. Lisa.
Sorry, are we talking about these as we're going through them, or are you trying to get through and then we're talking?
Yeah, I'll go through
Okay,
that.
I'll
But if
wait.
you have any questions, you can ask them. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if it's a question. I guess I just wanted to suggest that, at least for me, I'm not finding these Zoom council meetings particularly useful. I wonder if it's worth putting a pin in it until the fall and trying to redo these in a way that's in person and maybe a little bit more organic and discussion based, and less, sort of a 30-minute, 40-minute presentation on a Zoom call. I don't know if other folks are feeling that way.
Richard.
When you set the agenda for the Boulder City Council meeting, who will be involved in setting that agenda? The reason I'm asking is because I had requested at least a work session on Family Resource School, but I think it's going to be rolled into that. And I would like to see a little bit more time dedicated to that topic. Because, when everybody gets around and you get, 10 minutes to talk about that, and I think we need more time. I'd like to have more time.
So two things on the floor. Richard, yes, my intention was to have that topic discussed when we meet with Boulder City Council. Laura, have you had an opportunity to connect with them? Where are they at with meeting?
I've reached out to Matt, and I don't know his last name at this point. I forget who he is. And he sent the information about my request to, I believe, Taylor, who might be the manager for the city of Boulder. And she is reaching out to her council members to see if the proposed May date, I believe, like May 10th, is going to work for them. They had suggested virtual, which we're still kind of looking at virtual meetings at this point. I hear that you're interested in potentially doing something in person. Tuesdays are also their board meeting days, or their council meeting days, so that becomes challenging. But those are always good days where everybody's councils are together.
I think they're actually moving to Thursdays in April or May.
I'm sorry, Thursday?
Yep.
Yeah, they're moving the date of their meetings from Tuesday to Thursday in either April or May.
Thank you. So that might open up at least another possibility for us to gather. So I'm in the negotiation processes. They asked if we were at all flexible. I said, throw out some dates, and I will take that back to my board.
Hey, Kathy?
Well, I agree with Lisa that it would be nice to meet in person. I think it's really helpful for our counterparts to hear you, Rob, present our strategic plan and where we are on it, because they're not diving into board docs and they're not figuring out where we are. And I just think that there's more efficiency if we meet in person, but I also think, and I'm hopeful that by May maybe we'll be able to, but the other thing about Zoom is it just makes it easier for people to participate. So I think we just have to balance that. But what I've seen is I really think they appreciate your presentation about where we are and where we're headed. They don't ever give us anything back, but we, not ever, but I mean, I think it's more a one-way presentation, which is actually okay. But I think we'd also like to find out a little bit more about how we could collaborate with them in our meetings.
Yeah, I'm hearing more space for dialogue, more time to discuss family resource schools, and to the extent that can we fold that in that presentation? If not, then maybe that breaks out into something different. I would say as we set the agendas, we can do that collaboratively. We can certainly take feedback. I think that we started these meetings so council, elected official to elected official, have the opportunity to do some connecting, and then sharing. I'm happy to be the spokesperson for the district and sharing the work that we're doing. But again, that is all that we can try to figure that out as we move forward.
Just a quick,
Go ahead,
just a
Beth.
quick logistical question. So I hear you say we're going to meet with Boulder, and in what order are we meeting with the different city councils, and how does that get determined?
By availability so we set out, I think, about 18 months ago to try to meet with everybody, and then as time permitted and as time allowed, we just started setting up meetings. And so I don't think that we had any particular order. Laura reached out and was able to set those things up. So we can get a schedule to you all of the meetings we've had over the past couple of years, because I'm guessing that would be the order that we would re-engage them in.
I want to say that Boulder was the first, maybe Superior was second, and then Broomfield may have been the third one that we met with. And it's taken a couple of years to actually get these all accomplished, but I can certainly pull those and look and see what the schedules were. The agendas stayed pretty similar throughout each one of them, starting with the reopening of schools and getting kids back into them.
That's a great question, though. We can get that to everyone. So if we move on, we'll have to come back to Lisa's question, which is, do you just wait until you can do it in person, or do we move forward with a virtual option?
We don't need to come back to it. I mean, I hear Kathy saying that this is useful for her. I guess I was just kind of checking in to see if other folks felt like waiting would be worthwhile, but if Zoom meetings are working for other people, it's fine to continue.
There are members of the Boulder City Council that are also itching to get back in person, so I'm sure that the minute it's a safe option, they'll be right there with you.
Well, I think we just had such a successful meeting with them in person the last time we were able
Yeah.
to do it, and it felt like we accomplished so much more than we've been able to via Zoom, that if
Yeah.
we can do that again in the near future, I think the degree to which it would be preferable is impossible to overstate.
Okay. But no need to go back on that tonight. You're good? Okay.
Okay, so the next topic is one that we think won't take very long. We've worked that into the work plan for this semester, which was started with an RFI, I believe, around the requirements for National Honor Society, and realizing that at our high schools had just very different requirements for National Honor Society. We identified this as an equity issue, intend on bringing this to the board in March on an overview of the situation and our plan to rectify that issue.
Kathy?
Not to expand this, but I think it's bigger than just the requirements for NHS, because I think it gets to the equity of which students are in the advanced classes and all of that, so we may end up expanding this after we have the presentation in March.
Nicole?
Another question I was brought to my attention that there are some junior National Honor Societies at middle schools, and so do all of our middle schools offer that? And are there requirements similar also? My thinking there is because those schools are providing some of the community service opportunities that are a requirement for the high schools. Does that give students a leg up? So curious about that additional piece and if you've looked into that.
That's new information to me. I didn't realize there was middle school national junior honor societies, but I would say that as we prepare for the presentation, we can dig into that a little bit. I think that you start with high school and you work backwards, not to dig too far into the issue. We feel like it's something that's important. We feel like that we can work it in one session in March, and overview the problem and talk about how we're going to rectify the situation. Board meeting procedures. We're going to be talking about that today, so that's why it's scheduled for February, and that's the second part of this after the prioritization.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Cld Bilingual Education. This is a real meaty topic that I know this board and our community has been very interested in. We've had to take a little bit extra time to get all of the information that we need to be able to really script a path forward. So we're looking forward to presenting this in April, giving current status, and then looking future forward on how we're going to improve services for our CLDE students and improve bilingual programming throughout the district.
Okay.
Maybe the meatiest of all topics, declining enrollment. We know that this is something that we need to start talking about, and it's a complicated issue with multiple factors and parts, and so we think taking that on in April is the right timing to begin to start thinking about enrollment patterns and what's the path forward as we start to untangle the multiple factors that really equate to our declining enrollment. I know that many districts have a similar but different challenge. I mean, we've all read about DPS, we've read about Aurora, we've read about Jeffco. You know, I think that our problem is a little bit different because we're declining enrollment in very high-performing schools, which makes it different. So, in any event, will be fun. We will have a blast with this. Yes, Lisa.
And we were going to go over various things related to open enrollment and the way that works as part of this, right? Okay.
Yep, that becomes part of it. Yeah, it's open enrollment. It's, there's without getting too far into it, when you think about declining enrollment, you think about all the ways that we let kids get in schools, and whether that's open enrollment policy, whether that's the way we draw attendance boundaries, whether that's the way we have focus schools and magnet schools and all other different types of situations. It's really complicated, but we'll run through all that stuff.
Yep.
Follow up in May on our community school concept after we presented to you all last fall. We said we would do a follow-up on where we are, doing some more investigating and looking at this as a viable option for potentially some of our schools in the district. So this board commissioned an athletic review committee prior to when I started, but hasn't heard from the board since my first year here. We felt like it was an opportune time, given the fact that we have hired a district athletic director, feel like we've made some good progress to give the board an update on where that work is happening and some of the plans for the future. This is another very meaty topic, not to get ahead of ourselves. I know that I've talked to many of you around this idea of what do we need to be doing as we think about preparing kids to soar, is one of our three kind of major long-term outcomes we're looking at our strategic plan. And so we want to present to you in March on what we're thinking about. What does a kid need in addition to a high school diploma to be ready for today's world? Hence the term graduation plus. We really are, when you think about the world of work, we think about where we are. If we're just letting kids get a high school diploma, are we preparing them for the world today? And I think that's something that there's a lot of passion around in our community and amongst our staff, lots of excitement about that. So excited to present to you about that. And this would replace the typical CTE presentation, because it goes beyond, and this also taps into access to AP, IB concurrent enrollment courses. It also ties into bilingual education and thinks about career opportunities and apprenticeships, internships, all of those being really important opportunities for kids to get. So more to come on that. Nicole, you have a question?
Is the survey that went out to parents last week, maybe, is that information can be presented as part of this? Because there were a lot of questions around. Okay.
No, that was for, I think that as our district was looking at graduation requirements, I mean, ultimately somewhat connected, but won't be at the core of the presentation. Lisa.
I'm looking forward to this, but I guess I'm a little surprised that it's in March. If we have Equity Council going through this throughout March and April and May, would it make more sense to wait until they've concluded their work and talk about this as part of their package?
Well, we can talk about timing, and we've been talking to Amy in regards to some of the timing for some of the Equity Council work to make sure it syncs up. I think we can make it work. I don't want to wait too long, and I'm not ready in February. So,
I guess I'm just saying I don't want to do a whole presentation and then find out that Equity Council is, suggesting significant changes that sort of render it moot. It feels like it would be useful to hear about this when we know what they're suggesting and how it fits into their whole graduation plan.
I think the way that we have it set up, it would be more parallel work, right? That's, I think, working together. I think we'll be okay. I don't think that we present anything that would be contradicting. I think their work will help us refine our approach and strategies. But the big concept and the big idea, I think, we'll be ready to go with in March. Kathy, sorry.
Does that mean you're in trouble?
It
Kathleen!
does. It's only when I'm in trouble. As I listen to this, Rob, it seems like maybe we could talk about one of our pathways for graduation is capstones, which might pick up some of this kind of work. So maybe can we figure out if students are actually doing capstones other than at New Vista, because it seems like that kind of incorporates these multiple pathways that we're talking about, or we can do that later. I was just thinking out loud about that.
Yeah, there's certainly alignment with the ICAP and capstones, right? And I think that unfortunately, a lot of we're not taking full advantage of those opportunities, to your point, right? So I do think that can become part of what we present and what we think about long term as we think about just the value add in when kids attend and then graduate from our schools. Special education, we want to give the board an update on where we are with special education. Board members, as you can remember, goodness gracious, it was probably a year ago, where we presented some findings from an audit that we commissioned around some of our education practices, and this will be an update on where we are with the progress that we've made on some of those recommendations, just an overall overview in special education. That's not happening in January. March 15th.
Rob, I have a stupid question.
No stupid questions, but
Yes.
go ahead.
Where do we find that report for people who might need to have a refresher of what it says? Is it in?
We can get it to everybody.
Okay.
Or if you'll make a note, we can include that in our communications on Friday. So as I originally presented, it's in March, right? We fixed
That's
that.
right, that's what I saw.
It was always there. It
Yep,
was never in
whole
January.
time.
Long-range facility planning is something that is important as we think about the future of the district. As our latest bond is wrapping up, Rob will be presenting that in April. An update on early childhood education is scheduled for our next meeting. There's some recent changes in state oversight that we're wrestling with that we'll inform the board about, and just some of the overall great work we're doing in early childhood education. And then this is the list of things that came up in agenda setting over the course of the past 6 to 8 months, because we're a little bit later. All the green things are things that we have integrated. Yellow haven't been scheduled, but they're on the list, right? So Richard, there's yours, right, to bring family resource to a work session. We know there's some policy stuff. Oh, I forgot I have a touch screen. We paused the sit-in on race relations classes. I know that we had talked about that. We can revisit that. I would say that we'd want to wait until some of the masking requirements are done before we do that. And then these are some of the things we'll consider in regards to policy work. And then the things that are not green or yellow are the things we didn't have a chance to include this semester, but we can leave them on the list. This will be part of the bulk of the conversation with Heather. Is there something on this list that we'd rather take something off and put it on? Or do I have room to add things, which Heather always asks me, and I always find a little bit of room. Lisa.
I thought that we had agreed to have the school pay conversation as soon as our new board was seated, so I'm surprised it's not on here. And I guess as part of that, I'm hoping that we can also talk about pay for executive committees for some of our groups like CAPL, where it came up recently and there was conversation around whether the school district could pay, and if not, whether we could look into getting some grants for pay. But I think those issues go hand in hand. They're both about the equity of trying to make sure that we are recruiting folks who are going to bring diversity of thought and experience, and making sure that they're compensated for their time in a way that allows them to be a part of our district.
So do we want to add that to, I guess at this point, I'd present the plan, and then Heather, if you'd ask if folks wanted to add things for consideration.
Yep.
And then we'd kind of work through all that, like as the process.
I would just appreciate the clarity. Do you recall if you had already agreed to do something on that item? I don't recall that from the previous meeting.
I think it's been part of a conversation.
Okay.
We didn't agree, that's really kind of bubbled up in the fall, right?
Okay.
As something that's gotten traction, if I'm remembering that correctly, or did we agree on that in June?
I don't think, I wasn't trying to say that we had an agreement that you'd broken or something like that. I was just under the impression that we were going to be talking about it.
Got it.
But I think that maybe it's a little bit more of a rush. If we were only talking about school board members, we wouldn't be in a rush to do anything until our next election cycle. But if we're talking about executive committees for our district work groups as well, then it feels like it's something we could be talking about sooner. I know it's of high importance to CAPL, and I'd like to have the conversation about whether we can do it, and if not, why not, so that they can be a part of listening to that.
So what I'm hearing is
I'm listing it separately.
listed separately, then we'll think about it and see if that's something that the board wants to take up as something that we tackle in a work session somewhere in the semester. I think that would be the right rhythm. So,
And Rob,
yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nicole. Go ahead.
I like to eliminate redundant policies. You have KH listed twice, one on each of those slide decks. You can eliminate one line and feel really good that we've made
I
some
like that. We
progress.
did a thing. I love it.
So it's listed on this slide and the one before it.
So we probably only need it in one place. Unless you want to take credit for it twice, in which case, maybe leave it in both. All right. Rob, while you're noodling on that, as you alluded to, I do always ask the question. You just listed a whole bunch of stuff that you and the rest of the staff team are working on. The question becomes, how much additional bandwidth do you all have for new things? A lot, a little, none? What's your thought?
So it depends on the thing.
Depends on the thing, okay?
So it depends on the thing. When I look at our work board, which, by the way, I look at every single day, it literally sits in my office. I think we have, provided there's no more huge crises, we might have room for a presentation or update in May for something for information. And we definitely can try to switch some things around and make room for work session time for board things like, and if we want to talk about the pay, that would be a work session item. So I think we could fit in maybe a work session, an information session, and if there's anything on here that the board feels like we could wait on that would free up more room.
Okay, cool. All right. Are you done with all your things?
All things.
Okay, fantastic. So for those of you who are new to this exercise, what we generally do is go through the things that are still on the list, and we visit about them. Sometimes we have forgotten what they were and why they were on the list. That's always fun. And then if we remember, then we just visit about whether this is a priority and how you might want to fit it in. And sometimes Rob says, oh, we're doing a version of that already. What if we tweak it and think about it like this, and try to get as many of the things on the yep, can do that list, acknowledging that at the end of the day, not all the things can be added to the yep, can do that list, because they're already yepping and doing a lot of things on a longer list. So starting at the top of this list, and then after we go through this, then you can add things, and then we visit about those as well. So update on elementary counselors. This got to the list presumably because it came up during a business meeting or a work session from the board. Does anyone remember what this is? It is ringing no bells? Okay, shall we take it off then? Can't be that sexy. All right, look at how we make progress, Rob.
Am I doing this real time or?
I'm doing it over here, so you can just sit back and take a break, or you could do it real time as well, whatever you prefer. Okay, can we come back to paying for school members and talk about what I just added at the bottom? Is that okay, Lisa, if I promise I won't forget? Cool, thank you. All right, enrollment practices for charter schools. Who remembers? What's the question, what's the issue? Yes, please, Stacy. Oh, Nicole, go ahead. Eeny, meeny, miny. Okay, you were the email. Tag, you're it.
Oh. I think this kind of loops into our big top conversation about enrollment and open enrollment and aligning our, how we prioritize how students get into choice into open enrollment type schools, and making sure that the way in which we prioritize our charter schools and our choice schools and our neighborhood schools have an equity lens to the way those priorities are aligned. And so I think that can be looped in to the conversations around JECC and enrollment, open enrollment, that big bubble. And it gets to also having to reaffirm our policy about reaffirming the charter thing every year too. So it's kind of all looped together.
Stacy, did you want to add anything else, or did that cover it?
That pretty much covered it. It was about the preferences that charter schools use to admit people during open enrollment. And I agree, perhaps it could be rolled into the open enrollment discussion.
Okay. Any other board member thoughts on that? Yes, Kitty?
I just have a question. To what extent can we tell charters how to enroll people? I mean, do we have complete
That's a great question.
authority over them? Because I remember this was something that Tina was really interested in that, you know, anybody, any descendant of any founder can get into the school, you know, in perpetuity and things like that.
What's the haps?
Sure. Kitty, that wasn't in Boulder. That was Liberty.
But Tina did bring up an issue with a legacy
but she
admission.
she was very interested in the open enrollment.
Yes.
So generally speaking, what are the rules?
Generally speaking, we negotiate that as part of our charter contracts, and we also have it in policy. So I think the board does have broad authority there when we look at those preferences.
Okay. And, oh, go ahead, Kitty, follow up. Oh, yep, Kathy?
And I'll just add that OCR is looking at that too, Kitty, to make sure that our enrollment practices don't violate, when it comes to students with disabilities, to make sure that our enrollment practices are meeting the intent and the letter of the law for special needs students.
Okay.
OCR, Office of Civil Rights.
Okay. Rob, suggestion on the table is to add this into your ongoing conversation about enrollment.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think we can. And then after that initial presentation, board members, if we need a deeper dive, we can break that out separately. We could put it on the docket for fall of 2022.
Okay. Nicole, does that work for you? Stacy, that works? All right, so we're adding that one into the enrollment discussion. Fantastic. Our next item is timing of public participation. Suggestion to move it to the beginning of board meetings before the superintendent's report. It's fairly self-evident. Can someone just catch me up on the why? Yes, Kathy?
Sometimes, I think this came up after we had a very lengthy, what Rob does for the superintendent's report is rolls in Boulder County Public Health and other things that the community really needs to hear. And so sometimes, appropriately, there's a lot of information to be disclosed. And so people who are waiting to participate sometimes end up waiting an hour or 2 hours. So the thought was, can they have a time that they can rely on to participate? And then we can roll right into the superintendent's report, which can then take as much time as it needs. I think that's captured it. I see some head nodding.
See nodding. Lisa, thoughts on that?
Well, I know we're not supposed to get into a content conversation now, but I guess maybe I would just signal that I think the reason we moved it was because so many of the things people wanted to talk about, Rob was addressing during his comments, so we put it after the comments so folks could hear him address concerns, usually related to COVID, et cetera, prior to addressing them. So I understand that that's content. Maybe we just want to find a time to talk about this, but I'm just tagging that was the reason. I'm not sure if that changes the way you feel about wanting to move it back.
Super helpful.
I wasn't trying to take a position. I was just trying to recount why we were having the conversation.
Can I just tell you, every group that takes public comment always grapples with this. Where do you put it so they get the information they might need to comment upon without making them wait all night for their opportunity to comment upon the things? Quick question, Rob, for you. Is this, if the board is interested in having this conversation, this is an easy thing that you just do during a board meeting? Is this a thing they just can decide right now because it's not a policy decision? I don't understand how this one fits in.
Well, I think that we could do it a couple of ways. We could try to find a work session time to talk about the pros and cons. I think we could put it as just a discussion item on an agenda, and then a board could give us direction.
Okay.
I think those are probably the two best ways to do that.
And study session would give you more time and a little bit more latitude in sort of the format of the conversation, but if you put it on the agenda, that would be clearer? Like what is the trade-offs for one?
I'm just trying to think, right? Right.
Yeah.
So you could put it on as a study item, right? In regards to board procedures,
Okay.
right? You could put it on a study item. We could try to find a meeting where we don't have Boulder County Public Health coming, and then we could just have similar to when we have policy, right? We could talk about here's the thing, right? And everybody talks about it, weighs it in. And then typically we're able to get to a consensus on what we should do moving forward. And so we could do that, or you could do a separate work session. I mean.
Okay. Kathy, suggestion?
I don't want to waste a whole work session on this. I think we have some really meaty things to talk about, so I'd rather just put this as a discussion item personally.
Okay. Rest of the board, are you comfortable with that? Okay, fantastic. So Rob, you'll just find a time when it fits in the agenda for discussion item?
I will.
Fantastic. Discussion item on board.
Before we go on, I
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
request, please. I think it's a combination of hearing loss and wearing masks, but I cannot understand most of what Lisa and Nicole say. And
So lean in.
it's not volume. It's just, so I'm just wondering if somebody could, after they speak, somebody like Rob, I can understand you, just kind of summarize what they
Oh,
said.
sure.
Because we were well into this paying board members before I understood that that's what Lisa was talking about.
I'm sure we can speak more slowly and more clearly
Yeah,
for you,
and
Katie. I don't
it's-
think we need to summarize.
Yep. Okay. All right. We'll do the best we can, and if you're not tracking, just, hey, what the hell are we talking about? Like that. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, now that I see this in print, the enrollment practices for charter schools, that's should be with JECCR, not declining enrollment, in your notes. That
Add those together?
That's the relevant policy, and it's also above.
Not with the more general conversation. See, there you go. Okay, so the suggestion on it is that the charter enrollment conversation is partnered better with the JECC policy conversation as opposed to being rolled into the other discussion that Rob mentioned, more broadly speaking about enrollment declining and otherwise.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, Richard?
Just some timing on the public participation, Rob. Because I see that as very essential for some of the families that have to stay up and put their kids to bed and all that. I think we need to provide our public input on that, or not input, but a decision as soon as possible.
So you'd like to have that on an agenda sooner rather than later?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Rob, he's looking right now.
This is why we have the board.
This is why we have the board. I tell other people about Rob's board because it's so cool.
Why don't we do it March 8th?
March 8th? Okay.
March 8th works for you, Kathleen?
Yeah.
Does March 8th work for everybody to have the discussion?
Okay.
You had the policy red line on.
There's a policy, BEDB, our agenda, that identifies the order.
Oh, so
Participants
there you go.
included there.
So you've got that. So is that the study where, look at this. Laura, good job. All right. Does that work for everyone?
You got all the thumbs up.
All right.
Fantastic. March 8th. Well done.
Thanks, Richard.
All right. The next item is teacher pipeline, update on pathways to teacher program. Who remembers what this is? Someone summarize for me? Yes, Richard?
Very quickly, we do have 2 high schools that have teacher pathways. And this rolls into the dual enrollment. It could, yeah, in terms of kids getting 2 years of college credit before they graduate. So I'd like to see that discussion occur, and I think it's already set up someplace, either through the Equity Council. I can't remember what the agenda is for the Equity Council, but I think they have concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment as part of the conversation at the Equity Council.
Does that ring a bell for anybody else?
Well,
The Equity
it's
Council?
part of Graduation Plus, right? Which is some of the things that Equity Council is going to consider to make sure as we're working on these pathways, we do it in an equitable fashion.
Sure.
So it may come up there, but I'd also would be willing, if the board be interested, to set up visits to the classes so you could talk to the teachers and see the kids as a way to kind of dig in a little bit more deeper on what that is and what's happening.
Board, are you interested in that? Yep. Go ahead, Kathy.
I'd also like to include in that what we do for support for students once they become teachers. I don't think we have an induction program district-wide, so I think it might be helpful as part of the pathway to actually show how we're supporting those teachers once they become teachers. It may be a separate issue.
I do think that teacher induction is a separate issue, but which we could write down and add that as a potential topic. If not for now, then definitely we could capture that at another time. But back to, would the visit and conversation as we do Grad Plus, would that suffice on this topic for folks?
I see nodding. Yep. Okay. Fantastic. And Kathy, just give me words to put down for the new item on induction. What can you summarize that one for me?
It's just an extension of teacher pipeline. So they're in the high schools, but then what do we do once they actually start working with us? Because what the data, I think, shows is we lose a lot of teachers in the first couple of years. And so what are we doing for induction, and what are we doing to support those students who we've put through the pipeline, and then they get the reality of the classroom? So. But that can be something downstream. I saw it as an extension of the pipeline and supporting students. That's why I asked the question.
I accidentally just spelled teachers wrong while I typed that. So yay, education. Keep up the good work, people. All right. Those of you who are new don't know that I make jokes frequently about having gone through Denver Public Schools in the 80s, and we're all excited that I can tie my shoes. All right. It was a difficult time. We got through it. It's fine now. All right. So Kathy will add that one to the list, but we don't need to discuss it further tonight. The induction, we'll just have it to circle back to later. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, the next item then is restorative justice update. I recall you talking about this and there being things underway. What do you know about that, Rob?
I'd like to recommend that we present on this in fall 2022 to give our new Director of Restorative Justice time to get some things done and be able to present to you all on the work that's happened. I'm very excited about what's happening. I just don't know that she's been at it long enough to really provide a full scope of the impact that I think she's going to have on our schools.
Okay. Are you satisfied with that? Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
Relatedly, are we rescheduling the meeting between Equity Council and the SSAs? Because I feel like that's sort of hooked in, and I was looking forward to that.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check with our team on. I'd have to check with our team on how they've rescheduled that. For the board, our Equity Council was scheduled last Wednesday to meet with our school safety advocates. And because of many of the Equity Council members were staff members or were students, we canceled that because of access, because they wouldn't have been able to participate. So that's what Lisa's referring to.
So you'll look into the plan there and circle back to people?
Well, we can, Laura, take a note, and we can make a note of that and the upcoming agenda items for Equity Council. We can relay that to the entire board through our Friday communications.
Lovely.
If that works.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next item is an update on impact of increased counselors' supports in schools. Someone remind me what this is? Does anyone remember? Perhaps we already know the things that we needed to know about this. I'm going to delete it unless you stop me. Go ahead, Richard. Thank you.
Since we implemented the elementary school counselors, I believe I mentioned this, and we have not gotten any kind of feedback or report back in terms of the effectiveness of the elementary school counselors. If we have, I can't remember, but I think it's time that we should get some kind of report as it relates to that.
I want to say
we did have
presented,
one report, Richard. The counselors came and talked to us, but it was like we were still in the old boardroom, so it's been a while. I remember them coming and talking about the impact that they had.
Okay.
So I agree with you. It's probably time for an update. It was more anecdotal, I think, back then. But it was really helpful, as I recall. I'm looking around the room. Kitty, do you remember that?
So it's been a minute.
I do know that we did report back out to the board on that, and we had counselors talking and principals talking about the impact that the counselors had. Let us review where that was presented, and then if I could get a little more clarity on updates on impact. I mean, I think what you're going to hear is everybody loves the fact that we have elementary counselors, and they'll tell all kinds of great stories on that. I don't know that we had agreed upon data points that would move as a result of that investment, other than just having the additional supports. But
Richard, are you looking for more than people think it's awesome?
Yeah, but there were reasons why we increased school counselors at the elementary school. There are reasons. Now, what are those reasons, and what are the impacts for those particular reasons? That's what I'm interested in.
Right.
We must have some sort of
Right.
data.
There was some intent and
at.
purpose around it, and are we achieving the intent or purpose around it?
I don't want to overpromise on this. I mean, these were decisions that were made before I became superintendent, and it was a 3-year rollout and roll into the addition of elementary school counselors. In my estimation, the schools were severely understaffed in those areas. It just brought them up to a minimum standard in that regard, right? So I don't even know the data that you would show. I'm happy to take a look at what we presented last time and talk to our team to see if there's a way that we could share that information to you all. But I would argue that we were elementary schools had no APs, no elementary counselors, just a principal and teachers.
What?
Yes.
So Rob, I would defer to Nicole, but I think the reason the board did it, it was the #1 priority from DAC that year. And it had come forward a couple times. And it was such a clear priority, and that we figured out how to roll it out because it just made a lot of sense. Is that your memory, Nicole?
It was a top 3 DAC priority for many years in a row, and so that was initially why it was taken on. And definitely we heard from the community and from our schools the need to have some more additional social emotional supports for our students. And the feedback seems to be anecdotally very positive. But I think there are still questions about it that are worth discussing.
Go ahead, Rob.
I propose I take this back to our team, bring it to cabinet. Let me think about the data points that we think would be reflective of what effective elementary counselors that might support that, and see if we can't put something together. Then I would provide that to you all in writing, and then we could discuss whether or not at another agenda setting in another meeting if we needed to rise that to a work session or presentation. Does that work for everyone?
Does that work? Okay, fantastic.
Did you get that?
Yep, I did.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. All right, now we have these 2 items related to pay. So the original item was paying for school members, and I heard Lisa say maybe not so urgent because you have this, it can wait a little bit. But then paying for, did you say executive committee members? Is that what you had said, Lisa?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
We wouldn't imagine paying every single member of DAC or DPC or CAPL, but those folks who are doing the serious commitment, the amount of work to run the executive teams. I think they have various different names. Like, I sort of hesitate to say exec, because I think we actually called them something different in CAPL. But the folks who are elected and who are running the show, there's been discussion around pay, and I know we've sort of been back and forth that we did pay some folks, and then we didn't pay others, and then we stopped paying everyone, and then we couldn't pay anyone. But I think there's still a lot of question around what we should be doing and what we can do, and I think CAPL is the place where it comes up the most. We just finished having elections there. CAPL had been waiting to hear whether we could pay them, and found out on the day of their elections that we couldn't. And they were hoping that we could follow up, and I'm hoping we can as well. I think it can be separate from the board conversation. I guess I'm just suggesting if this is the sort of thing that we might take a work session for, that probably neither on their own is worth an hour, but together it might make sense to put those 2 issues together. But I think we can wait on the board until folks are getting ready to run.
I do think that they are separate issues.
Stacy had her hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, Stacey.
Stacy, sorry.
Have those members, leadership, ever... I was a tri-chair of DPC for 10 years, and this never came up. So it's been at least 10 years, unless they were paid prior to that 10 years. When were people paid?
DPC was never paid, but we did have some folks in some committees who were paid for a brief period of time, and it sort of sparked the conversation.
Wow. Okay. I just want to make sure that all groups are included in that discussion, not just a few groups. like there's SEAC and CBOC, when they come back together, like there are so many groups, we would have to make sure they're all included in the conversation.
So here would be my recommendation, board members, is that first and foremost, we need to start with a legal review of what is actually legal and not legal in regards to paying people without having to report. There's tax implications when so I'd ask Kathleen to either work with outside counsel or just to give an initial stab of a legal review. I will say that as we've uncovered some things, right, there were some instances where there was incentives that were tried to be provided for some folks who that were participating in helping and gathering and increasing engagement, especially for underserved communities. Stacy brings up a valid point. We have lots of folks that are that certainly support the district in various roles. I'd like to start with a legally, what can you do? And I think that's what separates this from the pay for board members, because statute has been passed that we know that that's a choice. We have to really work out the legal ramifications, the tax implications, all of those things on what you can and can't do, and then decide whether we want to do it or not. And I think that's where we are. So if it's okay, I think we start with a legal review, and then depending upon how we want to I'll work with Kathleen to bring that back, and then tee up that discussion on where we want to go, because I think that we have to figure that out first.
Yep, Stacy, go ahead.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's never anything that I expected as a tri-chair. But the fact that I didn't know that there were other leadership being paid makes me think this really needs to be a transparent conversation. I mean, I don't feel slighted that I wasn't, but I'm surprised that we never found out that was happening. So I just want to make sure that we are really transparent about it and include all of our groups that meet with you once a month, whatever the metric is that we're going to use. Just make sure that everybody's included.
Okay. Go ahead, Lisa.
As part of the, I think everything you're saying is correct. I would love to hear more, too, about maybe some alternative ways this could happen. Like, what would it look like if a district committee were to go after grant funding specifically to support their members, and just to make sure that all those things are part of the conversation. I think regardless of where we land, that we owe it to folks who are giving so much of their time to answer these questions fully and publicly for them, so that they understand what the answer is and why that's the answer.
And I just want to just real quickly clarify what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you say, Rob, that we're going to do a legal review of both things, both school board member pay and
we're coming back to school board members. Right now, we're just talking about the committees.
Those are separate. Yep. Got it. That's what I need to clarify. Thank you.
Because, Beth, the school board member pay already is statute.
There's no legal question there. So thing one, Rob and Kathleen, you're going to work doing an analysis of what the legal options are, if there are any.
Yeah, and I would say, I think a legal review on the ability to compensate folks for their service without them being employees. Right, and then investigate maybe some other options of things we could do, and then I think it becomes a conversation of this is what you can do, right? With what groups, what qualifies somebody to be able to provide that? Is it any committee? Is it certain committees where we feel like that we haven't had the types of input, and I don't know what that looks like, but I think that we let us dig into that a little bit and then bring that back, and then we'd be prepared to have the discussion.
Kathy?
As part of that, can you dig into which ones were paid and how and why, so that we all start from the same basis of
little
information?
Historical analysis there?
We'll break it all down for you.
Okay, great. Historical. Fantastic. Anything else on that? Okay. Now then, separately, paying of board members. There is no legal question here, so that it's simply whether you all want to discuss it or not. Would love to hear just thoughts around it so we can determine if there's interest by the board in adding this somewhere. Yes, please, Kitty.
Yes, I'm very interested in this, and I am not informed about the entirety of what the new statute will allow and what those implications are. But in general, I think if we are able to pay board members, we'll be able to attract people who cannot now afford to volunteer this much time. And I don't know if what was passed would be enough to encourage other people who can't do it now to do it. But the second reason is because as a society, we don't value public education. We say we do, but we don't. And education, as everybody knows, underfunded. Elected officials who don't get paid, board members and state board. And it's just, I think, would be a good statement of, yes, this is valued work and it should be paid.
Fantastic. Yep, Kathy?
So Kitty, I agree, we should have the conversation. It's a really slippery slope in my mind if you start paying for time that board members spend, as opposed to like a per diem for a board meeting. Because some board members are going to have the ability to spend more time, and how do you decide that if you did that and I went here and you got paid and I didn't get paid? It just seems like a really slippery slope.
Well, that's why
we want to have the conversation.
Understand what, what's legal and how does it work.
It's not as clear as you would hope, which is why we need to have the conversation. Is that fair, Kathleen?
And I want to know how clear it is.
And when the bill came forward, I had NSBA do a survey of what all the other states do, and I'm happy to share that as well.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
So if the board wants to take this up, where does it start? Is this a work session, deep dive conversation? Sounds like there's some legal issues and then some options issues type thing. What would that look like if they want to tackle it?
You could do that, or you could also find another, take advantage of a study, as a study item, as a discussion item. I mean, or you could do a work, I don't know that we would have information to present to the board. I think this is a solely a board discussion. So unless there would be information you'd want us to gather, I'd recommend that you add it as a study item to a standing meeting. And then if you don't get to it, right, you could roll it, right? Like you could study it over a couple of meetings, or you could get into the conversation and say, we need this piece of information, give staff some time to help you all collect that and then bring it back. It may just take a couple of meetings. I just think that in a work session, I would guess that you're going to, as you discuss this, you're going to need more information. I think a study item probably works best.
I like that as a plan.
Does that work for the rest of you? Study item, Richard?
It works for me. You would think that whoever put that statute together felt or thought there was a reason behind the statute, and I'm not up to speed on the statute, and I'm relying on that study session to give me the reason and the rationale why that was put together, because I know that there's a lot of folks in the state of Colorado that would benefit from something from that particular statute. Maybe not here in Boulder, but I know in other communities it would benefit them. And again, the details, the devil is in the detail in terms of what do we want to accomplish from it, but there are expenses and there's meetings and all that good stuff. But I think the study item, I think, is a good idea.
It's a good start.
And Richard, you raise a good point. We always get reimbursed for expenses, so this is being paid, so I think we need to keep it clear what we're talking about.
Okay. And then, Kathy, I did hear you offer just to share that study that you had, so when this comes up, maybe you send that study around. My question for you all now is urgency on this. Yes, please.
I have a thought/question on that. My understanding of the statute is that you can't, as a sitting board, vote to start paying yourself, right?
Right.
So, as Lisa said earlier, there's not really urgency around it in the sense that nothing changes until the next election cycle, correct?
Yep.
But it does sound like it's an important topic to address and to talk about in more details, as Richard was saying.
And it also sounds like from Rob's comments that you might start it at one meeting, want some more information, and then need to follow it up at one or two meetings. So you don't want to kick it too far down the road because it might take sort of a series of events for you to get your feet under you.
April 26th as a time to start. Does that work for folks?
All right.
Great.
Fantastic. That gives you time. All right. So with that, we get to some clarity on the items that were already on the potential work item list. Thank you all for helping figure out some great solutions to those. Now this is the moment where I say, are there other items that you'd like us to consider? Separating the items. Can you just pop down to your next slide to show the things we're going to talk about here in a jiffy? Okay. So you don't need to tell me that you want to talk about land acknowledgements, the pledge, pronouns, or board visits to committees, because we're going to talk about that after the break. So if anyone has stuff that's not that, would love to hear it. Richard, do you have one?
Yeah, I just have a question, and we do have committees. Okay, now I'm reading the capital recommendations for prioritization. I don't know if you all got that or not. Yep. And my question is, since we have this information, what do we do with it?
I think that's going to feed very well in our discussion after our break.
Okay.
To talk about the roles of committees, the role of board in committees, the role of superintendent staff in committees. How do you discern who does what? I think that's the meat of our conversation and discussion that's coming afterwards.
You're a man ahead of your time. Can you wait until after the break?
Yeah, I can.
Cool.
And then the other thing in terms of after the break, there's a thing that's been bugging me for a little bit, and that is names of committees.
Oh.
Like the one that comes to mind is CBOC, for example. It's got citizen in front of BOC, okay? And then we have a lot of non-citizens that would like to participate, but they see citizen in front of a committee, so therefore it discourages people from even thinking of applying. So that's just a comment.
Great.
Richard, would community work better?
Pardon?
Community instead of citizen?
Yeah.
Great. Excellent.
I think we just made a change.
There's a part of me that cringes whenever people talk about citizen engagement. I'm like, do you mean resident engagement or community engagement? I think that you should.
We should ask Kathleen, though, because I think it's, is it in regulation policy? It was part of our bond language. I think it's embedded.
Policy BDF, and there's some
out.
accompanying policies. That's why we're going to talk, and that's why it's for discussion and not necessarily action, because we're going to need to kind of get where people are feeling and thinking comments like Richard made, and then we go back, clean it up, bring it back for you, study action.
So hold those thoughts till after the break. But did anyone have a not one of those items that you'd like to bring up for potential addition to the staff or board work list? Kathy and then Nicole.
So Rob, in the past, we talked about whether we were going to actually go for a bond this next year. And I think that rolls into long-range facilities planning, but I don't see it there. And we've got New Vista that we need to figure out pretty quickly. I personally don't think we should make New Vista wait because we have done very little for them with our last bond. So I don't know where that fits in.
Long-range planning.
Okay, because it doesn't, it's open-ended, but maybe we could talk about including bond, potential bond and potential alternative financing as part of that. I don't know.
Is it in there?
Well, I don't know if we've gone to that length. I think that we would want board direction after a presentation on long-range facility planning, right, we want staff to go back and consider the different ways to finance the needs that you've identified. And then the conversation comes, do you think about a bond? Do you think about other types of financing available? So I would say that presentation leads into that conversation, Kathy.
Do you think there's time by doing that in April? If we're going to go for a bond, we're going to have to have decided that by June, I think, because then in August we have to come up with there's certain really tight times. And so, I mean, if you're comfortable with that, Rob, I'm just worried that compresses. And I know you had intended to do it earlier and we kind of had some things happen. So I just was curious about the timing, because I don't want to have the timing make the decision for us if there's another way to think about it.
You made him squint in thought. He actually squinted. He went like this.
Let me circle back with Rob Price on the timing of this presentation. I want to make sure that I'm responding to the collective will of the board here. I know Kathy's asking as president. So let me talk to Rob and talk about the timing of this presentation and how it would impact the potential to go for a bond in 2022. And then, Laura, if you could write that down, and then we can get that back to the board, and then we can have a conversation on direction if we need to move that up and what the impacts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've not had the discussion as a board, and it may be because of circumstances that we've been facing, we may not, but I would just like to know what the will of the board is, and not, like I said, have the timing decide it for us as opposed to making an affirmative decision about it.
Does that sound reasonable to everybody? And that if the timing would impact, would take that option off the board for the board to consider, that we look at moving that up in a place where it wouldn't? Does that sound okay?
I see nodding. They're nodding.
No commitments, but just making
Right.
sure that we leave options open.
And I just captured that as you'll talk to Rob Price on the timing and then circle back and see if you need to move
Yep,
that.
and we'll bring
Okay.
it to the board in our Friday communications.
Fantastic, thank you. Nicole, you had another suggestion, idea, thought?
Yes, and clarifying, so you're asking us if we want to add items particular to board meeting procedural discussion?
Nope, right now I'm asking for anything other than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I'd be curious to see how Kathleen's policy cleanup timeline overlays with this work, because I know she has a process there. But the parent engagement policy, KB, KB, and KBA, on DAC, we've asked this board many times in a row, and now Sam SEA is doing some work around our parent committees and how we're engaging with our community. And so is that something we can elevate? I know DAC is working on it again this year, but, and just generally how some of your, I can't remember the order of some of your other policies, but are there ones that we should be aware of and thinking about in addition to the yellow and green items that are on the list?
What else is on the policy list? And where might parent engagement and KB, KVA fit in, if at all? Eeny, meeny, miny, do I have a mo?
So I'd like to maybe just confer with Kathleen on what that looks like before I make any commitments. Let's kind of just see, what are we going to have to give up to do that?
Is it, it's not already
And
on the
where
to-do
is
list?
it? Well, our policy to-do list, it's somewhat gets dictated by some of this work, and then, I know Kathleen has been very committed to just trying to really just take down some of our very old antiquated policies. But without putting Kathleen on the spot right now, I'd like to maybe, unless...
I can be on the spot if you don't mind.
I do not mind. Go ahead.
So I did actually meet with the DAC policy subcommittee last week, which is why I don't feel too on the spot on this one. So the DAC has a very engaged policy subcommittee. They shared with me last week at that meeting a complete draft of KB, which is the first time I've gotten my hands on it. So this would be a proposed new policy that is general to parent and family and guardian engagement. The existing board policy is KBA, and it addresses Title I and the federal requirements for what that engagement looks like. My commitment to the DAC policy subcommittee was that I would do some preliminary work on getting it into shape, and then they want us to make sure that we get staff feedback and feedback from other groups the way the board expects before we bring that policy to you. So we were anticipating doing that work leading into March, when DAC will all meet on that final KB and sort of give it their blessing to really roll it to the board, with the expectation that end of April, we might be able to have that policy ready for the board's consideration.
That was your winging it response? That was kind of amazing.
No, I told Rob I could be on the spot because I actually had content on this one.
That was
so,
fantastic. Double check with you, Rob, you cool with that?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I just wanted to, before I made a commitment, I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that Kathleen that I was honoring the work that I knew she was already doing. It sounds like she's already well on the road to getting that landed, so fantastic work.
Does that address the issue that you raised? Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. All right, board members, do you have any other items that are not related to board procedures and things that you'd like to suggest for additions to the work plan? Yes, please, Kathy.
Like a broken record, Rob, where are we with ROI? Does that fit into the strategic plan? Does it fit into next fall? I mean, if you tell me it's next fall, I'll be quiet till then. For some reason, that got me so excited, and then we hit the pandemic.
Well, we did share some slides. We had made the commitment to integrate that into the last budget presentation. I know Bill had a slide or two. If you're looking for something deeper, I think it's the fall. And that, we have used it to make several decisions. We'll probably make it to use the methodology to make other budget decisions in this budget cycle. We'd be better positioned to share that with you all in the fall as just a separate item, is what I'm hearing the request to be.
Yes, and if Bill, I'm just having a hard time remembering when he told us what he's made budget decisions just based on that. So if he could highlight that when he goes forward, I think that would help a lot too. And what the ROI was that he was relying on to make that budget decision. I'm guessing it's probably not just ROI. There's probably multiple issues, but if ROI was part of it, I just think rolling that into our conversation as we're looking at declining enrollment and shrinking budgets, that's really helpful for our public to know that we're not just randomly slashing things, that we're actually being methodical and thoughtful about it. And does that make sense, Rob? So
it
I
sure
think
does.
it's some of both.
Yeah, I think when we have opportunities to highlight that midstream, that we do that, right? And we lift that up to the board. I will tell you that I know that reading recovery was a decision that we've made. We've made some other decisions as well, software related. And I know that we'll be making other decisions as we think about staff budget recommendations heading into this budget cycle. So I would say if there's an opportunity, we'll bring it forward. If there isn't an opportunity, we can wrap that up and bring something forward more formally September-ish.
Or does that work?
And
Nicole?
I would just ask, when they first presented the AROI stuff, they had that really nice image graph chart of, how much things cost to the return. And kind of, if we could see, as we're making changes and adjustments, how that is trending would be helpful.
Yeah, I would say that the challenge is that everything has changed with pandemic, other impacts. Those things impact results that you can't factor into a straight ROI calculation. And we also had District Management Council who we paid a good amount of money to help us with some of that initial work. Let me get with our team. Let me get with Bill. Let me see where we can be. I think that if we have time, that by early next year, September-ish, we should be able to take another deeper look. And if we feel like we need, District Management Council to come on in and give us another look, we could consider that and bring that recommendation to bring them back into the board for approval sometime this semester.
All right, any other suggestions for additions? All right, Rob, it sounds like you got your hands full there.
It's super helpful. And look at all that. We were able to get everything in there.
Because you always do.
There you go.
So you'll adjust your annual work plan based on today's conversation. And we will now take a break. And when we come back, we're going to visit a little bit about some of these proposed changes to board procedures. I would like to plant a seed for you to think about while you're on a break. When we come back and talk about these things, particularly related to the committees, but I think all of them, I'd just like for you to reflect on why is this a thing that you are proposing, which I will ask you, and I don't mean it in a combative way, but to think about, we know the things that we want, but what are the underlying interests? What are the underlying goals or motivations behind the idea? And particularly when we get to the committee's conversation, that might help us hone in on some specific approaches. So just noodle on your whys, if you would, on these topics, and then what do you say, how long do you want to take it for a break? How long do you usually take? 10? Fantastic. Let's take 10. That brings us back at 6:35 precisely, and we will talk then. Go. All right, board members, what we'd like to visit with you about now is some of the suggestions that have come from this group about some changes to some board procedural items. We're going to start with the three there above the line: land acknowledgements, pledge, and identification of preferred pronouns. And what I'd love to do is for one of you just to share what your thinking is around this, particularly if you might have been the one who got it on the list, which is great. And then I'd like to do sort of a quick round robin and hear from every member of the board on these items to see where you are. And then if we're fairly close to convergence, we might make some quick decisions, and if not, we can have some further discussion. Again, as I mentioned before the break, I'll just ask you to share and be mindful of what is your why. What do you think the benefits are? What's the underlying motivation of such items? And that will just help us all understand what we're thinking. So if we could start with land acknowledgements. Does someone want to summarize for me what this item is and why it's important? Yep, Kathy, please.
I think Richard can help with this, and Tina actually has drafted one. So it's just an acknowledgement that we are on land that Native Americans, that we basically took from Native Americans, and so it's how do we do that and when do we do it? I'm happy to pull up what Tina drafted at some point. And I think for me the question is, when do we do it? Do we just have it on our, do we have to say it at the beginning of every meeting? Do we put it on our website? How do we do it in a way that's meaningful but not overwhelming is, I guess, the question that I have.
Okay.
I would be surprised if we didn't want to do it, and I think, but I could be surprised. But I think the question is more how and when. Is that fair, Richard?
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I've been thinking about all of those three items that we have up there as it relates to equity. And I did a little bit of looking into land acknowledgement today and yesterday. And I believe that the Boulder City Council already did something around land acknowledgement, if I'm not mistaken. And the University of Colorado has done some work around land acknowledgement. I'm not sure when they do the land acknowledgement, okay? And I can see where it could be overwhelming, but I think in respect to the community that we stole the land from, I think that we should really consider sincerely thinking about doing a land acknowledgement at every school board meeting that we start. It doesn't have to be a long statement, but at least acknowledging the fact that we are sitting in the land and we're having our board meeting in the land that's been stolen from the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute. Plus the fact that we're so close to the Belmont Butte, which is sacred land for the Native American. You have Niwot, which is also recognized, and then you have Arapaho right down the road, you know. So that's my thought in terms of what we ought to be doing around land acknowledgement. And then we have like about, I don't know, maybe 5,000 or a little bit less, I don't know, a couple of thousand, a number of students from the Native American tribes in our district, and we never acknowledge that as it relates to our Native students that we have in our district. You know, and we have, what is it, Title VII now? Is it Title VII, the Indian Education Act? I can't remember if it's Title VII. It used to be Title. They change those titles all the time. And you know, the support that we give to that particular group of students is very little as it relates to financial support. Okay, most of the money is coming from that Title VII grant or whatever the title is that we support the community liaison and all that. But anyway, that's another topic.
Okay.
But in terms of land acknowledgement, I really think that we should be serious about it.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Yes, Kitty, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so what if we just put in a sentence, or I don't know how long Tina's statement is, but being part of what Kathy reads at the beginning of a board meeting, you know, just adding it to that, the board acknowledges, and then however we want to frame it, you know, living on land seized from Native tribes.
Okay.
I think it would be tedious if every person said it.
And some people do that where they rotate a member of the group to say it every time, but your suggestion is just to roll it into Kathy's regular opening remarks. Okay? Love to hear other thoughts on that as we're going around. Yes, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm in favor. I think we should do it at every regular board meeting. I don't have any strong feelings about who should say it.
Okay. Other thoughts? Love to hear from everyone. Beth?
I agree basically what Lisa said. I'm in favor. No strong opinion about how it should be done. I think having Kathy say it would be fine.
Okay. Stacy, you have a thought? Not one way or the other? Okay. And how about for you, Nicole?
I think it's fine.
It's fine. Great. So I don't hear any opposition. I hear some sort of agnosticism about who should do it and how. So Kathy, I come back to you. The suggestion, to the extent there was one, is that you might perhaps just add it to your opening remarks at every regular business meeting. What are your thoughts about that?
If it's the will of the board, it's fine. I think it should be short and sweet.
Okay. So how would you like to proceed? It sounds like you have some draft language from Tina from her time. Do you want to hear that draft language now? Do you trust Kathy to work it out offline? How would you like to get to the language? Yes, please, Lisa?
Can we just bring it in for a study at our next meeting and look over what Tina has and see if there's anything we need to change, or do you?
As long as you don't mean tomorrow.
Litigate it now.
I'm sorry,
As long as you don't mean tomorrow. I can try to find it by tomorrow. What I was hoping to do, Lisa, is to see what others, like what CU does, so I could bring a couple options other than just, because I know what Tina drafted was not in anticipation of a short, sweet statement to be read at the beginning of every meeting. Hers was longer. So I'm happy to bring that, but I will try to get it done by tomorrow, but it may have to be the next board meeting.
Yeah, that sounds good. I guess I'm just suggesting that I think talking about it on study feels good, and maybe if what Tina has is something we're all excited about, there's a place for that on our website.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
And then would you want to take formal action as a board to adopt that as a statement that you say, so everybody would have an opportunity to comment on that publicly?
Okay.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
New Vista has one. It's short and sweet. You know, if you go into New Vista's website, you'll just,
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do, Richard, is just gather a few examples, and then we can, it's always easier to pull together what other people have done and fit it for what we need than to start with a blank sheet of paper.
So how so do we have time for that? That allows Kathy time to sort of gather some different approaches.
We
Well,
can
I don't
put
know
it-
that we can get it on the agenda by tomorrow anyway for 24 hours, so
No,
it's going to
I'm
have to be.
thinking the 22nd, and then action on the 8th,
I'm fine with that.
but just the 22nd, we do have that COVID update.
But
So,
this won't take long,
Okay.
Rob.
Okay.
or we can go straight to action. Well, no, study and action.
Yep.
We should
Okay.
do study so that we
You got
can
it,
talk
Laura?
about it.
Study
and if there's
action, and if we can
changes.
put it on the big board, that'd be great.
Kathy's bringing language to the 22nd for study and action then on the 8th will be the plan. Speak now or forever be believed to think that that was a cool idea?
I would just want to add,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not seeing what Tina had previously drafted, but is it just going to be at board meetings, or are there other events that we might present language, and might that language look different, or might the district
a great
present
question.
language? And how might we include that or not include that in any resolution or action that we take, like graduations or other big events? And should that look different or similar, or not be included?
Did you have an answer to your own question and preference, or are you just throwing it out to the group?
It was more of a, when you're looking at what other people do, how
Noodle.
are they approaching it? And how might we want to think about it more broadly or more focused in the work of our board and the work of the district? And also, not knowing what Tina proposed, if it's lengthy, that probably wasn't an every board meeting suggestion, knowing Tina. So just trying to get some more information on all those different possibilities.
So Nicole, what I would propose is we start with what we're going to say at the board meeting, and then we can see how it goes and morph into other places. So we could have this get added as an agenda item after we look at this language to see where else we would want to do it. Does that make sense? Because I agree there could be other times. I just don't want to overwhelm that board meeting. So we could break it into two pieces, doing it at the board meeting and figuring out that language, and then figuring out at another time and another agenda setting when else we would want to do it. Does that make sense?
Richard?
I agree with you, Nicole. I think it should be broader too, because the graduations, I think, are a perfect place to do the land acknowledgement. You know, especially now that we're having graduations at Boulder High School field, and everybody's going there, because I do think that it's important, because now you're talking to the whole student body, you're talking to the whole community. It'd be great to see it at the graduations.
So we'll start with it at board meetings, and then you can discuss expanding it as appropriate, and perhaps just think about that in advance of graduation season. Rob?
I would say that it would be a very much a change in practice that we would dictate what happens at each school's graduation, that they have then had the opportunity, in thinking that how would the board be able to take action on something like that? You would have to work that into a policy, potentially, overseeing some of that. That just is a change in practice. What I've seen is that when, you know, the board or others do things that are well received, that it just kind of finds its way into the organization. But if you would want to take formal action, I would imagine beyond board meetings are in your purview, certainly, that's easy. We would have to think about how we'd want to do that.
Okay. Lisa's got a question?
Assuming we pass something here on the 7th, can we include that in, I can't remember the name, but whatever it is that we send out to all of the principals and suggest that they consider incorporating it in some way into their schools if they feel it's appropriate? Can we start with that?
I think we can share them with the board action, the board action that we've taken, and share the statement.
Excellent. Anything else on that? Wonderful discussion. Thank you all very much. Moving on now to the Pledge of Allegiance, whether to, love to have someone frame that up for me. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm excited we're finally talking about this, and I think I want to make sure Richard has a chance to address this as well before we get going if he wants to. But I'll start by sharing some of the reasons that I wanted us to discuss it. I think When we open our meetings with a shared statement, we're saying that these things, these values are the core of who we are and of how we see the work that we're doing. I don't think this is the best representation of our values. I would point out that other local governments don't do this, and I don't think it's certainly that any of us would suggest that they're less patriotic than a school board. I think the assumption is that local government is focused on local issues, and starting with a federal pledge isn't really an on-point idea. I assume the reason that that school boards have historically done this is because there's been a suggestion that teaching nationalism is part of what we were meant to be doing. I don't think that's the way that we see things anymore. It's not how I see my job or our schools. I think our core values, well, we had a list at the beginning in our presentation that we could look at, but things like excellence in education and equity in the way we approach our curriculum and our staffing, and a belief that each student should be treated as an individual and given opportunities that meet their needs. If we're to start with a shared statement, I think it should speak to that. And then before tossing it to Richard, who I know wants to speak about citizenship and some other things that are important, I wanted to mention 3 additional specific concerns with the pledge. First, I think the mention of God is alienating, not only to people who don't believe in God, but also, given the Judeo-Christian roots, I think to people who believe any other tradition. Second, although we make this optional at the school level, my experience is that it's often coercive from a peer pressure perspective, and I think we can take a stand by not doing it ourselves. And finally, I think when we speak about liberty and justice in the pledge, it's obviously dismissive of the huge struggles most of our nation has had to endure throughout history and still today. And when we state those things as actual rather than aspirational, I think that we belie the work that we have to do. And then, Richard, I'm hoping you'll speak to citizenship and some other things as well.
Thanks, Lisa. Richard, go ahead.
I'm looking at my other fellow board members to see if they have any comments or suggestions, but
They'll get some in a minute.
I know that the pledge in terms of the school, as it relates to schools, is statutorily and I'm going to say suggested probably in terms of required, because I know that it talks about giving students the opportunity, okay, to say the pledge. In view of the fact that in 1943 it was ruled unconstitutional, wasn't it? In 1943, I think I read something where that's the year I was born. It was ruled unconstitutional in terms of the First Amendment rights and stuff like that. But I look back at a number of incidents that have occurred here in our own school district as it relates to the pledge, where people are actually getting in trouble because they don't stand, and then somebody yanks them up and makes them say the pledge, and then so you know we have a lawsuit. We also have in our midst, in terms of our student body, a lot of folks that are not citizens. Yet, just by providing that opportunity kind of singles them out a little bit, because if they don't stand, you know, it creates problems. So I'm not sure how to handle that, but I think at the board level, because I don't think the statute requires us at the board level not to say the pledge. So I think that we could look at doing something different with that time that we have that people are asked to stand and recite the pledge and all of that stuff. You know, I'm not standing, and I will continue not to stand until things become better in our society. I think there's other things that we could do as it relates to the schools in terms of providing opportunities. I'm not sure what that would be. It just says provide opportunities. That could mean a whole lot of different things in terms of schools asking kids to stand up and saying the pledge, or if that's what they're doing. I'm not sure what they're doing. But I do think it puts a lot of kids into very difficult positions, okay, one way or the other. So I think we need to make sure that we set the stage for doing things differently.
Thanks, Richard.
In our district.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm
Are you done? Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt. Stacy?
Yeah, I just want to be clear that we're talking about the pledge before our meetings
Yes.
and not in the classroom.
Yes.
They're two very different conversations, and I just want to be clear because it seems a little mixed up. We
Yep.
are just talking about at our meetings, correct?
Yes, that's what we're
Okay.
talking about now.
Thank
Yep. Okay. Did you have thoughts on that? Just,
I'm actually neutral.
okay, great. Lisa? Yeah. Here, yes, for the board, yes. Different conversation to talk about changing in schools. Yep.
Sorry, I already spoke, but Richard did remind me of one other thing I wanted to mention, which is yes, that Richard and I aren't standing and we're not saying the pledge. And when we start our meetings this way, instead of feeling like some sort of unifying moment, it feels like a divisive start to me. And I would love us to find something we can all agree on.
Interesting. Thanks, Lisa. Other board members, love to hear your thoughts on this one, pro, con, somewhere in between, whatever you got, I'd like to hear it. Kathy?
I'm happy to help Richard with the history of it if he wants to know. Basically, you can't force students, that's what the case said, to do the pledge. But the controversy lately has been with words under God, because that was added to the pledge later. And the Supreme Court dodged that. I remember it was a big deal. There was a dad out of California, and the court found that he didn't have standing to be able to bring the claim. So it's still open for debate whether the pledge, if it's an establishment clause issue and blah, blah, blah. So all of that, I think, is immaterial to whether we're going to do it at a board meeting. I'm neutral on it. Being a white woman in my position, I've never been offended by it. I actually am inspired by it. I don't see it as saying that this is where we are, but this is what we strive to be. So I disagree with Lisa a little on that it's a statement of where we are as opposed to a statement of where we want to be. So I'm fine doing it, but I also don't want to make a big deal out of it because I feel like in these divisive political times, we don't need to be really, I mean, I think it's fine to not do it. I just don't want to make it the front page of the paper about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I know it seems a little bit not as bold as maybe you want to be on it, and so I will go with the will of the board on that. So I'm fine not doing it. I like the idea of coming up with something maybe we can all agree to, but I also don't want to offend those people who feel similarly to me in saying it. So I don't want to draw a fight if we don't need to.
Okay, yes, Stacy?
My other question is, if we decide not to do it, and again, I'm neutral, much like Kathy, if a future board decides they want to do it, would they just go through the same process to add it back in?
That's my understanding. Is that your understanding? As a board, you could change it, 3 weeks after you change it one way and change it back. That is your prerogative to just choose what you do at your meetings. Kathy?
Kathleen, is it part of our policy? Do we have to change the policy to do that?
It's in the same policy, BEDB, board agendas, as the public participation. That policy enumerates the order in which a board meeting will proceed. Pledge of Allegiance is one item in that list.
So we would need to do a policy revision.
You would.
Love to hear from other folks. Beth, what's on your mind about this one?
Yeah, I'll add to the conversation. I'm in favor of it. I don't think I feel as strongly as these guys, but I think it seems like a good idea. I'm interested in digging into how we set the tone for a meeting. I do think that the Pledge of Allegiance, depending on your views or how you experience it, it could go lots of different ways. So I like the idea of removing it and thinking about how are we framing our meetings. I'm looking at the the presentation slides over there with the values. I really like the idea of having that being at the center of where we start the conversation.
Okay.
So I'm feeling mixed on this one, which lends me to feel like I'm going to be agnostic. Because we require it of our students and we are a board of education, and because there are members of our community that are on both sides, I don't want it to be a polarizing event in our current times. So that's one piece that I'm holding. And then the part about our board being united I appreciate that part as well. And so what I'm wondering, is there other alternatives? Could we all sit? Could we not have to recite it while it is played? Could we, a number of things. So we're acknowledging we're showing what our students have the opportunity to do, which is not participate if they choose not to. And we can do that collectively and still honor those that might find it more of value or a positive noted, just as an idea. But I feel that conflict between the two sides of our community that will want this and want to see this go away, and how do we thread that needle in a way that is very delicate and respectful of everybody that we represent.
Okay. Katie, do you have thoughts on this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm neutral on it in general. You know, since I grew up saying the pledge every single day in school, you know, there's a piece of me that because it's that huge tradition that I like it. But that doesn't mean we have to do it. And Lisa, would you mind emailing me your thoughts on it, because I really couldn't understand you? So that would be great.
I can email you, but if we're talking about this now, are you just wanting to review them later, or?
Yeah, I just want to understand what you were saying about it, because you seem to have more than one point, and I just couldn't hear it.
Yep, there's
and I
lots of good
would like
stuff in
to
there.
know it.
Okay.
Okay. So love to hear thoughts on sort of Nicole's question of, is there a way to sort of find some middle ground so we're not picking a battle that maybe doesn't need to be picked, but also honoring the different perspectives and voices? Kathy?
Well, if we have to change policy, we're going to have a conversation about it publicly. So that might be the way to solve this, is to say we're going to put it on an agenda and see if we get public comment, because as much as, I mean, I agree with Nicole that there will be a faction of our community that will be deeply offended by this. And so how are we going to prioritize that? Right, I understand the equity component too. So if we're going to have to put it on to change policy, then I think that invites the conversation, and we'll have to see where the conversation goes. We can't direct it. We can say how we each feel, but we'll have to see what the community says, I think. So I'm okay putting it out as a policy revision to see where the board wants to go after we hear from our community.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, I think all of that's correct, and I guess I just want to take a moment to add that while it is possible that there are members of our community who would be offended by the idea of us removing the pledge, it's certainly also the case that there are members of our community who are offended by the fact that we currently do the pledge. So I don't think it's offend no one or offend some people. I think we're in a position where we're doing something controversial already, and whether we continue it or not, we can't pretend that there's a space where everybody wins. No, I don't like that phrasing. Let me just say there's not a space where everyone's going to be happy. People are already unhappy now, and it may be the case that changing it will make other people unhappy, but I don't think it's the case that I know it's not the case that everyone feels good about how we handle it at the moment.
I wasn't suggesting everyone felt good. I was just suggesting that I think something this important to some people merits a community conversation. And I, for one, will welcome to hear what the community has to say about it before I make up my mind about if there's a middle ground or what we need to do. So I'm fine with adding it to one of our agendas as a study item for a policy change.
Okay.
Does that make the most sense? I think that's the only way we could actually do it.
Yeah,
Nicole's got some thoughts?
as long as it's clear that it's for the meeting.
Right.
I mean, our entire conversation has been mixed. So I think we just need to be really clear that it's for our meetings and not in the classroom.
That's right.
Too.
Okay. Nicole?
And to add and also remodel this, personally, it's even in my youth, I did not, and when it was more controversial, did not stand for the pledge. It's always made me feel uncomfortable, but trying to Kathy's point, get that community input before we make decisions that are potentially polarizing.
Okay. So the suggestion is that because you would need to change policy, that the way to sort of get a sense of how others who aren't you might be feeling one way or the other, that you just put it on an agenda and have a public conversation. My question for you, Rob, is what does the schedule look like? Does it allow for this? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've already slated March 8th as the discussion around where we would add public comment and have that discussion. And this would be the same policy that would dictate this. So it's the same conversation. So it's already on for March 8th.
Excellent. Sounds like you're going to have a great conversation for March 8th. With Lisa, gives Kitty time to review your opening remarks on the topic as well. Does anyone else have something you want to say at this time on this topic? It's a really important one, and I just want to thank you all. I always appreciate that you talk about hard issues and do such a respectful job of it, so thank you. All right, so we'll see how that story shakes out in the future. In that case, the last of these items, before we get to committees and such, is the identification of preferred pronouns by board members. Would love to hear someone frame this one up for me. What's the underlying reasoning? What are we hoping to accomplish? Yep, Kathy?
I think that Richard brought this up.
Oh, great.
And I just have a proposal after Richard explains what he wants to do with it.
Okay. Richard, do you mind sharing what your underlying ambition is here, please? Thank you.
You know how I feel about it, so what's your proposal? I'd like to hear it.
My proposal is we just change our name tags, our nameplates.
Oh.
So that we don't have to say it every time we vote and we don't forget and that we are respectful and and you can say it or not, I think, when you say here, but I don't think we need to say it after we vote every time. So the first time you say present, that's fine, I think, but I don't think we need to do it after every time we say something in the meeting. And I think it'd be very helpful to have our nameplates say that, our pronouns, and maybe even, Richard, if you wanted, I haven't gotten any business cards in a long time from the district, but if we had business cards, we could put it on there too, because I agree with you, it's a respectful thing to do. And I'm just trying to figure out a way that shows the respect that we want without going too far in doing that.
And I would add maybe including it as a standardization under our names in our emails, and then on our board website as well, under our names, our preferred pronouns there. I like the idea that it's in printed places, or that we're using it when it's a natural we're not being introduced to our public at every board meeting, we're calling the roll, which feels a little bit different to me. So I like the fact that if we're meeting somebody new, that can be a norm. My name's Nicole, my preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. And then anywhere where our name is printed on the district materials, whether they're business cards or internet or emails, having that included there is another avenue, because these are hard to read.
Okay. See, a lot of folks wanted to jump in. Stacy, did you have a thought on this one? Nope.
I was just going to second Kathy's proposal to put them on our name plates.
And I
Other
agree,
thoughts, Kitty?
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I think it is important. I think it's the only way that people who are either trans or non-binary or anything else about their gender identity feel validated, is that we don't assume that everybody's pronoun is what we think it should be based on what they look like. So, but I don't want to have to say it every single time. That gets very tedious. But putting it on the website, I think, is great. Putting it on the business cards, just in any kind of documentation or communication that has a board member's name on it, just include the pronouns.
Beth?
And I'll just add that I appreciated Nicole's distinction of when we're doing roll call, isn't the same as an introduction of when you're meeting someone. And I think it sounds great. Yeah, let's do it. Let's put it into all the printed material.
Great. So Richard, you were going to go next, and then everyone jumped in front of you. What are your thoughts on the suggestion on the table?
No, I think the idea in terms of the name tag, I think, is a good idea. I would like to see, at least for the first few meetings, for us to tell the public that what you see now in the name tags, and explain the fact that we are an equity district, and we do have equity councils, and we do have a bunch of equity committees that are already using their pronouns before they even speak. They introduce themselves and they say their pronouns, and that happens pretty much daily. And I think that if we can say at least a couple of times, a statement that will make sure that everybody knows that we are following a different process as it relates to the name tags and the website and everything else that we're going to be doing, where we will list the pronouns.
What do you think about that idea?
Well, so here's what I would propose. I would propose that we work with Kathleen about what that language would be. And when I do my introductory remarks, I will turn to you, Richard, and you can read what that says, since you've been the one spearheading this.
What a nice
and you
idea.
can read for the first 2 or 3 meetings. Here's please notice our new nameplates. Here's what we're doing on the website. And we can come up with some language with Kathleen about, just a sentence or 2. But I think you're right to show that we're trying to pay attention to these equity issues. So then I would just turn to you and you would read that, and then we could continue with if you're okay with that.
And we should put it on the name tags that we wear, too.
Oh, yeah.
Are you okay? Does that make sense, Richard?
No,
Is that...
I'm okay with it, but I think it should be other board members too to do that, just not me.
Well, other board can say something, but I think we should just have one statement, and I can read it, but you're the one who's brought this forward, and I think it would be great to have, doesn't need to be me reading it. And other board members during board comment can then comment on what the new policy is.
that's cool. And I just heard for the first few meetings, do we want to quantify the first few, or you want to play it by ear?
Let's just do it till the end of March.
Okay.
And then I do have a question for Kathleen, and Laura's raising her hand. It's kind of related because you mentioned, and I don't do this, and I should, in my tagline for my email, I would love to have standard language for all of us for what we should say when we're responding to emails. I'm not talking about who and what we say, just the
email
signature block that's consistent, that says the right language about subject to open records. I just think it would be really helpful to have that be consistent, because I made something up and I'm sure it's close, but I don't know if it's really what Kathleen
Reading
would
this
like
email
me to
requires you
say.
to dance a sassy dance after you read it. Oh, I'm going to start putting that on mine.
If we were consistent on that, I think that would be helpful. It sure made me feel better. Maybe no one else needs to follow it. So if you could help me with that, Kathleen, that'd be great.
Kathleen, you don't mind doing that? And you'll send it out to the...
I'd love to do that.
Excellent. So you look forward to getting an email from Kathleen on suggestions for what your email signature should look like on your district email. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm in favor of all of this. One other thing that comes to mind is that during our meetings on the topic of introductions, while we don't introduce ourselves, we often have a variety of district staff that introduce themselves throughout the evening, and we might make it a point to ask folks who come and speak to the board either that you're introducing them with their pronouns or that they're introducing themselves, especially because I do think they're the folks who are most likely to refer to by pronouns as the evening goes on.
Rob, thoughts on that?
We can certainly adopt that as a practice, for sure.
Okay. So staff, presenters, and others. Okay. Anything else on this topic? So you'll start working on... Oh, sorry, Laura. You're behind me, Laura. I can't see you. Just
I
yell.
don't know if I can get the nameplates printed by tomorrow. I go to a teacher at Boulder High, so I might not have those until the February 22nd meeting.
Okay. You got thumbs up. People understand.
So what I would probably do tomorrow is say that we are going to be getting them, and then we'll roll into our practice after the 22nd.
Okay, lovely. Excellent. Anything else on that topic? All right. Thank you all for a thoughtful conversation there. Our next topic here is sort of a bunch of things that all come under sort of board interaction with committees and schools and other such things. So, Rob, would you mind framing this up for us a little bit?
I sure will.
Oh, you have a slide about it.
I do.
Aren't you
I'll have
fancy?
to turn my microphone on. So just as we start to have this conversation, I would think that it's my goal, is our goal as staff, to ensure that board members have access and the ability to see the things they need to see, talk to the folks they want to talk to in ways that help inform the board work. Committees is a great way to get a snapshot or a snippet of the communities, depending upon how those committees have been made up, and just wanted to differentiate between the different groups that currently weigh in on decisions, ideas, things we're considering. And this is defined in board policy BDF. So my hope today is we can have some really good conversation on what are the best hopes and wishes of the board. Kathleen and I and our team can come together and create a policy that creates clear, just rules of the road on how we set this up to allow for the interactions and the information and the co-creation that I think has become a really powerful strategy for the district in really, as we start to tackle some really big things, having that input and say and access as staff has been really, really helpful, as I know has been helpful with the board. So right now there's really three kind of groupings. There's a board advisory committee, and that's a board, like a committee that was commissioned by the board or is directed in policy. Not always the case, but for the most part, the board appoints a liaison. I typically, as superintendent, appoint a staff liaison for these committees. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's other staff. Board advisory committees are by policy open to the public and posted as public meetings, right? Which can have some limitations depending upon what it is that you want to do. You know, for some committees, being, you know, speaking in a public meeting, they may not feel like that they could share the things they might want to share, or might not feel comfortable, might want to participate. And we also have staff and superintendent advisory committees that we do have some that report to the board out as needed. We do have some of our staff superintendent advisory committees that have some board observation opportunities. If you have more than 2 board members participate, then it becomes a public meeting, as we all have learned very closely in the past week, and have a staff liaison, and then but those. So they can be public in nature if you have more board members participate. And then we have community groups who operate by just, you know, what their interests and passions, and they organize and they come to board meetings or they email. And we have different variety of community groups that weigh in, right, on issues. And so I don't know that this is the whole list of committees, but it's pretty close if it's not. And I tried to align who are the board advisory and who are the superintendent staff advisory as it sits today, with the understanding that that this has just kind of happened organically. I don't know that there was like a lot of strategy. I think that I started creating committees when I got here because I saw the voices of some of our, you know, important constituents were not being represented in the other committees that existed. So CAPL, Parents of Color Council, we developed Equity Council and Youth Equity Council, and then we've recently developed Title IX Advisory, and then you have these long-standing committees that were board directed, that oftentimes they were a strategy as an issue was bubbling in the community. So in response to Casey Middle School, we developed an indoor air quality committee, right? And the board wanted to have that report to the board, right, to get the information that they didn't feel like maybe they had access to. Some of these are driven by statute. So I think the conversation today goes, I think these are the questions that I think that you all will want to consider. You know, what are the differences between when it's a board advisory committee or a superintendent advisory committee? How do we make sure that board members are involved for the work, right? That we're being very transparent with the things that are happening. How does the policy reflect that? And then how do we make sure that all board members have equal access to information as you're weighing in on policy, weighing in on budget, weighing in on decisions? If some board members are engaging in some committees and others are not in observing superintendent staff committees or being the board liaison, I think that we could fix that with some system changes. And then I also had Kathleen dig in on what constitutes a public meeting. Are there any ways where if we're having a meeting and we had more than 2 board members observe, could that not be a public meeting? And the answer to that is no, that is definitely a public meeting. So in any event, I think that, you know, just to frame up the conversation of the differences as we think about committees, you know, I would turn it over to you, Heather, and the board to have like a conversation on, you know, what are the hopes, desires, dreams of the board, and how can we reflect policy to make that happen?
2 clarifying questions before we start, Ron, Steve, whoever you are, Guy. Rob, is there anything in the existing policy about board participation in any of those committees?
So, not really. I will, and the board hopefully knows this, that I err on the side of access and transparency, right? So I think what's evolved is that folks have said, hey, can I go to that? Hey, can I do this? Yes. Hasn't always been the case in our district, right? Or in some other districts, but I believe that we've just got such a strong team and it helps us collectively make better decisions. But it's not really outlined or defined. Okay. So I think we're at a moment where it's good to kind of just sort that out in a way that everybody thinks works.
Okay. So that, I think you maybe already answered my second question, which is, how is it done now? And it sounds like people ask, you lean toward yes, but it's a little on the willy-nilly side?
That's a way, I guess, you could describe it. Yeah. I would say that it's just, you know, I think we're at a point where we should think about what are the roles, what works for folks, what are the differences, what are things that we're trying to accomplish, and how would, depending upon where that committee sat, how would it impact our day-to-day work? With the understanding that this is all reflected, board members, in your policy, right? You get to change this, right, in the ways that you feel like are the ways that we need to shape this. So
Great. Excellent. Thank you for all that. Ooh, people have thoughts. Let's go to Kathy and then Elisa.
So I appreciate the way you're framing it up. I just have a question, which is, I think it's an important conversation to have around committees, but I think there's another issue, which is how are we more visible in the community as we come out of COVID? Because right now, my sense in talking to my fellow board members is we're anxious to be out in the community again. And so the committees is one way because it informs our board work. But I also think it's important, like with Nicole and I able to go, and anyone could go, Friday night to the Monarch receiving of the posters. And I think, Kathleen, that's okay, right? Like we could all show up at a concert and it wouldn't be, or do we have to like let Laura know if we're all going to show up at like the Fairview play on Friday night?
So the statute is specific to meetings at which public business is discussed. So for a concert or a play, no.
That's what I thought. So, so Rob, at some point, I just think it would, if we could broaden it past the committees, since we are kind of hopefully coming out of COVID, about how we can be a little more visible in our community.
I think that's an easy fix. I think that, to the extent that we have a common calendar for events, we are dependent upon schools letting us know what's happening. I wish I could tell you that every time something happens at a school that we get that and that's 100% accurate. But I'm certainly happy as part of news and notes. We can bring this to cabinet tomorrow because we do have district-wide activity types of calendars. We can share that with board, and board members can certainly, if there's things that you're interested in attending, we can certainly facilitate that.
And then your job, if there's more than, two of you there, is not to gather in a corner and talk about board business.
So I was going to say we would have to then at least have an agreement amongst ourselves, because we are board members, that when the teacher comes up to us at the play and says, oh, I have to tell you this latest thing, we have to agree amongst ourselves that we will say, I can't talk to you here. There's a policy and a process for how we handle that, and that we're all consistent on that. Otherwise, I think we get in trouble.
Okay, I see nodding. Board members, you cool with that? Okay. So thing one, you'll share the district-wide events calendar with the board. Board members, you'll go to the things that seem interesting and fun to you and not congregate and do board business accidentally.
And then just if you're going to attend something, let me know so I can make sure the appropriate staff knows. I know that we see ourselves as public servants, and others they see us as the superintendent and board members, and I don't want any surprises for principals not knowing or understanding why somebody might be there. So if I would just ask that you shoot me an email, text, hey Rob, I'm going to go to this, and then I would just let the corresponding principal, whoever's going to be at the event, know.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Lisa, you have thoughts?
Well, not on this, but on the, yes, but eventually on this. But on the last slide, I wanted to mention two things. One is that I'm fairly certain my time on audit committee has come to an end, and the other is that the number of times this district misspells my name is beginning to border on the satirical.
So do I understand?
Yeah, you just got the ballot. This one was somebody else.
So Lisa would like to get credit for only those committees that she is on and also have her name spelled correctly. It's bold.
I mean, it feels like an easy opener
whatever,
for this conversation.
Right? It's the small things. All right. Were you fixing that on the fly?
I just changed slides.
Okay, cool. Hide the evidence. Well done, sir. Yes. Good job, Ron. All right.
It's true. We're being, just fair in our.
That's right. Okay, so board members, love to hear your thoughts on this. Please, Stacy, go ahead.
I just want to say a blanket statement before we start talking about this. I think it's important we all acknowledge that we all have differing limitations on our time, and that some people are able to attend many more things than other people. And I just want to make sure that's out there, and with no judgment by any of us of why someone attends and someone doesn't.
And I think the related sort of piece of that, Stacy, then is how do you decide what the system is? Do you decide assuming that everyone wants to go to the things, or do you try to create some systems and protocols around people can opt in, knowing then that that means that you might end up with differing levels of exposure to the community and such things. So these are all the things that we need to balance for exactly that reason. Okay. So who's got a thought or a preference around this, an answer to any one of the questions we have up here on the board? Maybe I'll just ask it differently, which is, who's itching to go to committees and which ones and why? That would help me. Nicole?
So with bullet point number 2, how do we provide opportunities for board members to be involved in the capacity of which they want to be involved? What I have been reflecting on is, if it's always the same board members going to the same committees, does that make it seem like they're the only ones that care about that particular topic? And do they hold more information and create a space for us where we don't have access to the same information? How does that impact positively or negatively our ability to work as a board? And so how can we be more systematic in that approach if there are multiple people that want to go to the same types of meetings, knowing we can't? Is there a way to rotate? Is there a way to, I don't know, but those are kind of the things that I'm thinking about. How does that reflect to the community? And then how does that impact our shared and collective versus our individual knowledge of what's going on in the community?
Lisa, how about you?
Well, I guess a couple things. Can we look at the other slide again? I won't talk about my name again, I promise. I'll try not to. When we're looking at the column on the right, I think that there's a few different things, even though we have it all sort of under one category, right? Like CAPL is a meeting that anybody could choose to attend who was a parent in the district. I don't think we require folks to be Latino in order to attend. So I don't think that there's any reason we couldn't have 3 or 4 board members attending and have it be listed as a public meeting, because it is a meeting to which members of the public are invited. And then sort of conversely, I think things like Youth Equity Council and POC are both places where board is specifically not invited to be without an invitation. So I guess I'm just saying, when I'm looking at this list, I feel like some of these have opportunities for board members to attend. CAPL maybe has an opportunity for any number of board members to attend, and other of these do not have opportunities for anyone to attend. And seeing them all listed together, I think, is maybe a little bit misleading or confusing for newer members. I guess my second thought is, in terms of rotation, I don't know that that's an idea I'm in favor of. If I think about some of the work of these various committees, there are arcs, right? There are things that we're starting at the beginning of a semester, at the beginning of a year, and continuing on throughout the year. And I think having consistency in board engagement and representation is useful. Trying to do a pullout where somebody knows what happened in stage 1 and somebody else knows in stage 2, and a different person knows what happened on day 4, it feels like it makes it harder for the board to understand and to relate to what's happening in the committee, rather than easier for everyone to have a picture.
Rob, can you just really quickly speak to it? Is that apples and oranges up there in the same column?
Well, I mean, just depends. I think we would have to kind of talk through, I do agree that some of these committees really would be restrictive for board members. I think that, CAPL has I want to honor that they've just gone through really trying to get some organization and leadership. That really started as a committee that was developed in my first 100 days to really elevate the voice of our Latinx community. And to the extent that that voice could still be pure in a public meeting, I mean, I think I would have to talk to them, and let them kind of figure that out. Would they still be able to share the raw emotion and stories that have helped us drive some of the major changes that we've driven over the course of the next couple of years in that type of environment? So I would say that, yes, this is flexible. I wouldn't say that this is what I'm suggesting these have to be. I tried to get all the committees, put them in 2 rough categories, and then certainly we can figure out, do you move something over to a board committee? What does a board committee look like? What are the I just think that we would just have to kind of hear the board, what their thoughts and ideas are, and then shape that and bring that back for a review.
Lisa, does that help? Oh, lots of people have thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think, as you know, I only started joining CAPL meetings a year and a half ago after receiving an invitation. I do think that's important. My bigger point, I guess, was just I understand why you've organized them this way, but if part of the goal is to find places for our newer board members to slot in, I just want to be clear, maybe as they're looking at this list, that there's it's a little bit complicated, and that maybe it would be useful to give them a list of potential opportunities where they could join rather than to, I think this is a little complicated.
Okay, lots of folks want to get in. That's been real quiet, so I'm going to let her go ahead, and then we'll go to Stacy, and then Nicole, and then Kathy.
Thanks. I have a question. This is maybe just showing my ignorance of how everything works. But what I'm hearing in this conversation is, for me, the question of what kind of feedback loop do we have? You know, board member A goes to whatever meeting, and then is there some kind of procedure, protocol, I don't know what word to use. What kind of feedback loop do we have to share information? Because to your point, Lisa, if you're slotting people in, it might get really confusing. It makes sense to me that you might have someone who goes to all the same meetings and then shares it. Like, that's part of your role. So I don't know. I guess I just don't quite understand that piece.
Is there a systematic approach to that at present? Okay. That's why you don't know.
No. I think that's one of the improvements that we have an opportunity to make is really kind of tighten that up, Beth. I would say that the only places where we see that is through Audit Committee, District Accountability Committee. I think that's CBOC. So it's not consistent.
But we have a template. We have a few committees where we have a feedback loop.
Well, the right? Template we have right now, and I think it can be, the template right now is that there's a board member assigned to each committee on an annual basis, and then they report out. And they can do that. Right now, the only thing we do is publicly in board comments, right? And it's not that's the template we have. That's not to say that's the right template. I think there's other ways you could figure it out, too.
So it isn't necessarily like calendared, like on this day you're going to report out about DAC or whatever.
And we could do it. We could do it in writing. We could do it publicly. We could do it whatever the board thinks we would want to do. I mean, I think the idea is right. How do we get folks as involved as we can to get as close to the work as we can? And then how do we share that out in a way that regardless of how much you engage or disengage, you have similar information as we're making decisions as a team?
Yep. Stacy?
Yeah, a couple things. To follow up on that, I actually think we hear feedback from many more than you mentioned. We heard from the Equity Council. We heard from the Youth Equity Council. Last time at our meeting, we heard from the Indoor Air Quality. In April or whenever, we're going to hear from Athletic Review Committee. I mean, I think we hear from a lot of these committees, actually. Maybe not from the board member, but I think that that's the way it's designed. I mean, I shouldn't be the one reporting on the Athletic Review Committee. I'm just the board person who's there to kind of steer them if they need some direction. So I don't think hearing from me after every single Athletic Review Committee is useful or even needed. And I think that might be the case for some of these other ones. My other question is, on the board advisory side, there are some committees listed there that don't have a board liaison. Is that by design? Is it just because someone didn't say, hey, I'd like to do that? Does it preclude someone from doing it?
So not by design, just kind of how it is today. I just tried to give like a really honest snapshot. Some of these committees I had to look at in policy to the extent that some of them are meeting regularly or having the opportunity to report out to the board, staff, whomever. Again, I think we have work to do here. That's why this is as a topic for us to think about. And Stacey, you're absolutely right. There are opportunities for these committees to report out to the board as a collective. I think what we could think through is strategies, whether through a liaison strategy or through a public report out, information sharing, written report, or public, hey, update. I think those are all strategies that we could weave into a better way of doing business.
Yep.
I actually think my role on the Athletic Review Committee is not to report out what goes on there. I'm really there just to guide them. And when they ask, what would the board think of this or that, it would be really uncomfortable for me to report out on what they're doing. They have an agenda that they're working on, same as like Richard and Lisa who go to Equity Council. They don't report out every single time because they have their own agenda that they're working on. We're just there as truly a liaison. And so I don't even think it's appropriate for us to report out in many cases.
So I think what you've raised is an interesting question, which is what is the role and is it different for board participation in the board advisory committees versus board participation or interest in the superintendent and staff advisory committees? Because your answers to those might be different, and that's sort of why the questions are here. Lisa, I see your hand, but I got a lot of other folks who want to jump in before you. So I had Nicole and then Kathy, and then we'll go back to Lisa.
So I wanted to clarify, going to the legal, so Lisa commented that because we're parents, we can go, but Lisa, Beth, and I are all parents. That feels like that's still more than 3. Like, can we be clear about what hat we're wearing, or is that still in conflict of sunshine if we're 3 of us there despite being parents?
Sorry, can I clarify what I meant? Because I agree with that. My point is because it's a parent meeting, I think its ability to fall under a public meeting is different than some of these other ones, because anybody from the district is already welcome to attend. So if there was a time when Capel felt comfortable having more board folks come, it would be an easier change to make because it's already a meeting that's publicized that anybody can join. Unlike a lot of these meetings that are private that don't have the ability for anyone to join, right? Turning Capel into a public meeting really isn't a change. I'm not suggesting you would go as a parent and that would get around open meeting laws. I'm saying Capel already almost functions as an open meeting, so it's an easier one to add folks if Capel's comfortable with it.
Did you want to add anything, Kathleen?
I'm not sure what the question is.
So
if you went as a parent rather than a board member? No.
So because Capel's meetings are posted publicly, the suggestion is that on the Capel's website, but we're not posting them on the on the board docs for the board. Do we have to do that if 3 of us attended in this Capel example, or because I feel like the suggestion is not, but so I'm kind of confused.
Just that it's easier. Your point was that it's easier.
It's already a meeting to which technically anybody could attend, right? It's not limited to a specific group of people. Everything else on that list has a very specific membership. Nobody is permitted to join who isn't already a member, unlike Capel that is actively recruiting anybody across the district who is a parent who feels like they have a reason they need to be there. So our ability to add more folks to Capel, if Capel wanted that to occur, is possible. Everything else on that list really couldn't hold any more than 2 board members. That's the distinction. Sorry, that's true. And I think also budget maybe. And
So there are a couple for which it's already kind of, y'all, if you're interested, show up. And for those items, those meetings, if more board members were to show up, you would still need to talk about it and post it as a public meeting. But it's an easier thing to do than they have a constrained number of members already, and now you're sort of an interloper into what was previously a private meeting.
Got it. Thank you. So that'd be DAC, DPC, Capel, those.
Ish, yeah.
And to the part about the sharing, I mean, I talk to members of POC and Capel regularly. I encourage Ana Fernandez-Frank and Capel to send out that document that they sent ahead of our meeting, because I feel like there's a lot of times where we're not all, there is some information we don't have. And I think that information leveling is, finding a balance there is worthwhile.
Yep. And I'll just tell you, as someone who just came out of a city council retreat, one of the things they talked about is, wow, now that we got everybody on all these committees, there sure is a lot of reporting out that we're doing at meetings, and it'd be great if we could actually do the work of the people. So there's this balance that you'll need to strike, and thinking about how you might want to go about doing that. All right, Kathy, and then Lisa.
So I was going to kind of echo what Stacy said. When I was at CBOC, I was never comfortable. I was there to listen. And there were a couple times CBOC got upside down with the process, and so I would talk to Rob about that, but I wouldn't bring it up at the CBOC meeting. And then CBOC would report out to us. So if there was a question, I would bring it back, but I would never be like the board representative there to answer the question, because I just didn't feel, I could say, well, I think we might, but let me ask the board, kind of thing. So I agree that maybe we have to figure out what our roles are in these, but that's how I saw my role, was not as speaking for the board, but as being a representative of the board and bringing those questions back if there were any. And then, Rob, I remember when you were saying that families might not be willing to be quite as vocal. I remember we used to have meetings with our Latinx families where we were all invited, and they got really emotional. They would share and the whole board was invited, and if they wanted, and we had translators there, you came to some of those. And I don't know what happened to those meetings, but I found them to be pretty helpful. So what I'm wondering is, at the end of all this, if there's other ways we can think about being engaged that's not just constrained by this list. But Richard, you went to those meetings too. They were really, I don't know I felt like they were listened to. I don't know if Richard agrees with me. you listened, Rob, because you were the one who could do something about it, with the issues that they would bring. So there's other points of engagement that I don't know what disappeared when Capel came into place. And then I always worry about how do we hear the voices of the people who aren't going to be represented there, but that's an issue for another day.
Okay. Richard, just want to speak briefly on those meetings, then we'll go to Lisa.
Yeah, very quickly. Capel and the Equity Council are the two committees that I've attended quite a bit. And I know the ones that you're talking about, I think, are parity. And I don't even know where they're at in terms of existence. But with Capel and also with the Equity Council, they're very clear that we're not engaging with them, we're observing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very clear that my role when I go there is to observe the meeting, because if I try to engage, they just kind of like,
Zip it.
yeah. Even when they go into breakout rooms, for example, and stuff like that, we're not assigned to breakout rooms. We're just observing, and then we observe the general session when they come back together. And the same thing with Capel. I've gone to a number of meetings, and it's basically to observe.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what difference that'll make in terms of observing versus engagement versus, because they're talking about district business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does it make a difference, Kathleen, if board members are just observing or if they're talking out loud?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because I did get a legal opinion on this today, anticipating that question. So when you look at the statute, it says 3 or more at a meeting where public business is discussed. Not where board members are discussing public business, but where that business is discussed. So my opinion is it is an open meeting if there are 3 of you there, and it's not a play or someplace where there's clearly not public business that is the purpose of that meeting.
As Lisa was suggesting, it's already announced as a public meeting. So therefore, any board member can attend that.
And that would be the extent of the open meetings law's requirements for that sort of meeting. If you're not directing it or possibly taking formal action, we're not required to record it. We're not required to keep minutes in the same way you do for a board meeting. It's that notice piece. And the notice does need to be posted where we post notice of board meetings, so that someone who's trying to follow the work of the board will know where you are.
Oh, that was a good clarification, too. All right, I was going to go Lisa next. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I guess I want to agree with what I'm hearing from Kathy and Richard and Stacy about how many of these roles are observational. But the other thing I wanted to say, I agree that reporting out to the board for a variety of these isn't appropriate. On the other hand, this is cool, this list. I've never seen this before. I think if we could refine this, make sure that we have all the right people in all the right places, it would be very useful to me to know who's doing what and to be able to talk to my fellow board members about the things they're involved with when I have questions. I don't know anything about athletics. So, of course, I know Stacy's not board, but having a list like this and remembering, like, if I have an athletic review committee question, I can call Stacy up and she and I can discuss it. Feels like a great way to not have reporting out, but to also know who's accountable if I want to have a conversation with my board.
Okay. So that's just a quick action item. Is that something we can do, Rob? Clean up this list and then clarify who's representing, certainly on.
Yeah, we can do that.
Do you want my reading glasses? They're pink.
Oh, my gosh.
Can I tell you, I came home one night from a meeting and there was my husband and 4 of his poker buddies all playing poker. And 3 of them were wearing my reading glasses, which is just hilarious because they're not going to admit they need reading glasses, but they'll borrow mine. Hilarious.
I can actually see, these are for distance.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yep. And these are my natural highlights. It's not to
First
hide
you
my
call me
gray. I feel
Ron,
you.
now I can't see.
Yeah, I know. Focus.
I was trying to fix Lisa's name before she could notice.
Too late. So you can clean this list up, and then we can share it, because it does create sort of some transparency and some sort of connectivity among board members to figure out where they can ask questions.
I would say that I can clean it up, and then I would want the board to weigh in on, do we just, whoever's involved in whatever they're involved
We'll
in,
get back to
stick
that.
it out, and then a process in the next prioritization on who's going to do what? I would really want that direction,
Okay.
right?
But I also heard just a request to sort of separate. There's a third category here of meetings that are already public meetings. So if more than 2 board members were to show up at them, it doesn't change the public nature of the meeting. If there's a way to identify those.
Another category, what are the meetings that everybody can go to at any time?
That some of these committees, their meetings are already public meetings that anyone can come to, as opposed to some that have constrained and limited membership. This is what happened while you stepped out. And so for the ones where it's already a public meeting, if more than 2 board members show up, it's still it's not a different kind, it's just you have to post it differently, but it's still a
which one on
public
this
meeting.
list besides DAC? DPC? Those are posted? We post DPC?
Okay. So noodle on that.
Rob, you were in the restroom, but the conversation we were having was about how some of these meetings, while they're not listed as public meetings, technically anybody from the community could join. So we could list them as public meetings without changing what's happening there, and how
Sure.
that's not the case for other meetings. So that was the conversation that I think you were out
We
of the
could
room
totally
for
do that.
that's
Yep.
being referenced.
Cool.
Laura, go ahead.
Things like DPC, the meeting dates are posted on the website under DPC, but there is no specificity as far as an agenda or anything else on that website. The only ones that I put the agenda on the website is a board meeting.
Okay.
And we're also putting that outside the front doors like we're supposed to do too.
Okay. All right.
Just for clarification's sake, right? So to the extent that we post these as public meetings, it's not just here's what's happening. You have to post an agenda as well.
That's my understanding.
I'm looking at Kathleen.
The agenda requirement is only for meetings at which the adoption of any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action of the local body could occur. So we have to put notice of the meeting, but that agenda requirement, minutes, recording, those attached to meetings of the board where that formal action could occur.
But if 3 or more of them are going to attend any of the others, you just need to list it on the list so people can say, hey, if you want to see what Richard's up to as part of his board function, he's going to be at this meeting.
We would need to have something that says, we anticipate 3 or more board members could attend the DPC meeting this week.
But you don't have to do the agenda and the minutes for those same things. Got it.
Right.
This is fun. We're learning a lot about open meetings law today. Kathy?
I just want to say, I think, not surprisingly, you agree with Robbie. I think we've realized what a mess it is. And I get the perception that it's just Lisa and Richard who care about equity. So the public needs to know that Lisa and Richard are going through May or whatever we decide on as a board, and that we have a policy for how we decide who goes to what meeting, so that it doesn't look like some of us care, some of us don't, some of us have more time, some of us don't.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to what that finally looks like, because I just think it's not very clear, and it also does not help our public understand how we're engaged in what we're doing. So I agree with you, Rob, that I don't think we'll get it resolved tonight, but to have this clarity and then to have some policy about how we decide who goes to which of these and when, and do we roll off, and I think I've heard pretty clearly we don't like do eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and everybody goes to one. So there's a term that you go, and then there's a handoff at the end of the term, I think, or something like that. If you're comfortable with that, Rob.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable. Here's what I've heard, that there is benefit to a familiar face as a board member within many of our committees, that, people switching in and out can be confusing, and so I've heard that. I've heard that some of these meetings can just be posted as public meetings, right, which creates additional access. And I've heard that we want to be able to have a conversation as a team, right, multiple times a semester, probably through our prioritization on, who's going to do what, who's continuing to do what makes sense, right? And I would also say that things change when public meetings become in person versus being online as well, right? I think that creates a different dynamic. But I think that we've got good clarity to move forward. I really appreciate this conversation. I do own the fact that this is a mess and it just kind of ended up the way that it is. but we'll also make sure that we clean it up so it's in a place where you all feel good about where we are collectively as a group.
Stacy?
Can I add something to that? And that is maybe what other of these board advisory meetings could use a board liaison or want a board liaison, or if there's any interest from our group to be the board liaison, because there are some, as you see, that don't have one.
Okay. Kathy?
So what is the process? So you have the Long Range Planning Committee. What's the process for deciding if there's going to be a board member on that? Do we have a process for deciding if we want a new board advisory because we feel like there's places that we don't have information and we need an advisory? How do we decide when you set something up if that's just you, or if it's, because something like long range planning, Rob, seems really critical to the board, but maybe it's just you and you report back to us. I just feel like there's no clarity around how we decide which category it falls in, and then how we would add. I don't know if we need a policy around it, but how would we add to this list?
I'm sorry, I was looking for the Long Range Planning Committee and I didn't see that.
No, it's
Right,
in
that's the
your,
point.
it was in part A of today. We're
Right.
going to get a report on it. There's
We're going
going
to
to
get
be.
a report on the long range planning, right? But then that would potentially fold into a committee. So I don't have a great answer for that. I think that we don't have rules to the road on what the board's expectation is of staff when we appoint a board committee, board member or not. I have not been appointing board members to committees that we've been developing. And as board members have shown interest, hey, can I check this out? It's been sure, no problem. Right? But I don't have a formal process. I think that's what we're working on and talking about. Right? And there are times when your presence is helpful, and frankly, there's times when it isn't helpful. And I think that we just have to be honest and open with each other on why my thinking would be that. And so I think that we have a really good start to kind of write the rules of the road and figure out a way to bring this back. So by the time, I think the early wind is these are the things that everybody can go to. I think we can get to that first. I don't think this is we work on it for 6 months and then plop it all in front of you. I think we work on this and bring this back to you in chunks, and hopefully within the next couple of months get this sorted out on where we're going to be.
Can I make a suggestion? 1 second. Is the way I've seen other councils and boards do this is there's a list of committees that are often by category, by type. Like this is one where we have to actually, this is a voting member of the group. This is someone that's just, they've asked to have someone come and check in. And that list includes the frequency also of that group's meetings. So a person with less time might say, I want to do one, but I can't do the one that meets every Tuesday. I don't have time for that, but I do have one that meets quarterly. So which one of these meets quarterly? I'm jazzed about that. And then people do it at council retreats, but you could certainly do it at planning sessions where you review it and say, does anyone want to change? Then someone says, this group meets on Wednesdays and now my kid plays hockey on Wednesdays, so can someone else, take this one over so I can go to hockey? You have that conversation and then it's part of the public record so people can check in on it.
So it sounds like you have a process you might be willing to share.
I may have what's not
me.
mine, but I can share with you what I've seen. Happy to talk to you about it.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, lots of people do it.
I always want to help out Ron, you.
Ron, he needs all the help he can get. I mean, he can't even spell.
That's actually related to my question.
Yeah.
I think that a board member representation is in statute for DAC, correct? Some of these don't have that.
Exactly.
So for example, I'm on the athletic review committee. It was created by the board. Shelley wanted it, so she was the board person. When she left, I was the community person on it, so I just took it over. It would be helpful to me if periodically you met with Harry and said, do you still want a board member here? Because you're right. Sometimes I think we can hinder what's going on. Sometimes I think we're helpful. So for those ones that it's not by state statute or whatever, it'd be really helpful if staff would check in, if you could check in with them and say, does this still work? That would be really helpful.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Sounds like Kathleen and Ron, maybe with a little bit, Ron, again, now that we're doing it, now it's funny. Now it's just going to be a thing. Now it's just going to be a thing, Ron. And Rob are going to work on this, and I'm happy to provide some additional things. Did you spell it right, though?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh, yeah, there you are, but without the beard. Anything else on this pending some additional work to bring something back to you by staff? Yes, Nicole.
I just have a question because I did an RFI on the BDF policies. So we're going to maybe clean up the language about how we decide and how these committees are formed and maybe make them tidier so it's broader encompassing of any committees that might come up because who knows why we don't have to live with them.
Some of this in policy, we might have to develop a regulation. I just need to sit down and figure it out. We just want to be really clear to the board and to the public how we do this, be intentional, thoughtful, and inclusive as we do it. So.
And the thing that I've seen there's another section that's like temporary or ad hoc committees, right, where the board threw this one together just for a hot minute, expect it to be just for one semester, and then it goes away. And then, the next time you revisit the list, you're like, okay, so we're done with that one now. We take that one off the list, and then just so it's something of a living document. Yeah. Okay.
I think you're right. The policy should have a provision for ad hoc committees and how we do that. And what I'm wondering, Rob, is how do we signal to our public that we're doing this work, because it could take a while. But I think it's an important message. So can we, maybe in your report or something, you could say that we are taking on these policies. Here are what the issues are that we're going to be addressing, just so it doesn't just linger and people know that we're taking it on. Because I think that might address some of the concerns of board members that we're not going to, it isn't because we don't care, it's because we're trying to figure out what the appropriate process and procedures are around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like a report. So like a report out in just my superintendent's update tomorrow. Laura, I'm just I can't take
or in a
notes
couple
and-
weeks, Rob. I just want to signal people that we're working on this. That
Sure.
And there's a reason, and that things are going to stay the same for a while. But you can frame it however you want to frame it. I just think it's important for the public to know that we are trying to figure out how to be more outward facing. We're trying to figure out what these roles are. We're coming, just all of those things that we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, Richard?
So I just need to understand then, we're talking about board advisory committees. We're not talking about the superintendent committees.
Talking about both.
Board advisory committees, right?
No, I think we're talking about all of it,
Yeah.
right? I'm thinking about both groupings, right? With when are you observer, when you are member, how do we figure those things out? So I'm thinking about all of it, Richard, right? It's not just not just the board advisor.
Okay, but you still have the leeway to do your own advisory committees.
Yes, I would say that yes, that I need to be able to do that and pull those folks together. But maybe there's more clarity on how I do that, when I do that, why I do that. Might be helpful, right?
And just want to make sure that everyone is also tracking that this might be a piecemeal thing where it'll come sort of over time with pieces. It might be clear on board advisory committees that might come first or something, but it won't all come all at once because it's a fair amount of work. I see nodding that they're getting that. Okay. Yep. Kathy and then Nicole.
And you're just going to have to help me get over the angst of the long-range planning since DAC got out in front of us on that. So at some point we need to have a conversation about what that committee looks like, how we're engaged, what the community is going to look like. I think you're going to do that when you bring that up. Whenever I can't read this small print up there, but when you talk about long-range planning, is the committee going to be part of that conversation, or is that later? I mean, just the fact that you're going to have a committee, I think, is all I'm wondering.
Here's how the rhythm. So I have to talk to Rob Price. I think what we agreed upon is I have to talk to Rob Price around whether the date that's proposed right now would impact us being able to put together a capital planning committee that then would look at options and recommendations that would then come to say, yes, we want to go for a bond in November of 2022. Right, so the first piece is, Rob, does this long-range facility planning presentation need to move up or not? Within that presentation, the idea would be that we would present to the board and to the public, these are what we feel like are our long-range facility needs. And then from that conversation would then go into the formation of a committee, right, that would then make a recommendation that would then start that whole other body of work.
Nicole? Nope, you're good? Okay. All right, anything else on this at this time? Sounds like we got a plan to get a plan. Yep, Richard?
Just a quick question now that since we're talking about committees, we do have that couple recommendations, and I'm not sure how, because I mentioned that earlier, and you said, well, it'll probably fit in when we talk about committees, and I'm trying to figure out.
Well,
The
basically
naming.
within the recommendation is CAPL is requesting board engagement, right? So what I need to do is go back to our team who was attended the last CAPL meeting. Then we need to go to CAPL and kind of understand what their desires and issues are. They shared a set of recommendations of things that they feel like are priorities for the district to work on to the board. If you look at this board and if you look at the work we've done over the past 3 years, you'll see that their fingerprints are all over all kinds of improvements in this district. Right now, to the extent that their priorities supersede the board's priorities, they don't, right? But there is some overlap. But to the extent that they want direct communication and contact with the board, that would be the only superintendent committee that would have that, because they're asking for similar access to the board as District Accountability Council, which is driven by statute. So I'll respond. I'll catch up with Anna, and I certainly appreciate their willingness to push us. I think that's made us better. I've told them that, continue to push us. That's actually a great dynamic. But to the extent that we would then treat them as like our District Accountability Committee, when there's lots of other committees, I think that that's just something we have to take into consideration.
All right, anything else on that at this time? Rob, we got one more thing to coordinate on, is that school visits?
Yes, and it's a similar to the last conversation. As we think about school visits or teacher roundtables where we've limited the attendance to just a few board members, we know that first come, first served isn't working as a way to make sure that board members get a chance to see the things that they've always been interested in, right? I want to be fair and mindful of that, and just more thoughtful how we go about scheduling those meetings moving forward. So I just wanted to open it to the floor to see if board members had suggestions. Is it you get to, we do like a forced ranking of schools you want to go to, and we try to make sure everybody gets some of those? Is it some different system? Is it? I mean, I don't know, because again, this was we started the meetings, and then it was board members and, hey, can we come? And I said sure, and it's been wonderful, and it's been really, I think, super helpful for those that have been able to be there. But I just want to open it to the floor, Heather, facilitate a discussion and give us direction, and we'll do whatever the pleasure of the board is.
Richard, looked like you might have a thought, and then we'll go to Kathy.
The thought that I have is, if it gets to be regulated the way you're suggesting, or maybe you're not suggesting regulating it that way, but what happens if I, as a board member, want to go visit X school? Is that going to be part of that, or can I still go and make visits the way that I would like to?
No, well, I'm talking specifically about the teacher roundtable meetings that we've scheduled. Sorry, clarification. Whenever we do school visits, we've been opening those up to the entire board, right? And certainly, so it's mainly about the roundtable, the scheduling of the teacher roundtables.
So lots of people are going to want to go. How are we going to sort it out? Kathy, suggestion, and then Stacy.
Well, that was my question, Rob, is school visits have always been, they aren't nearly as informative as the roundtables, which is why I think there's a clamor to go to the roundtables. But so I don't think we're talking about school visits right now. And the way this came about was we didn't want to overburden you and Laura in scheduling school visits for us, so we just thought we'd piggyback. And then we had new board members come on, which was totally fair for them, so that's how we kind of got to where we are. But then I think Richard raises a good question, which is if Richard wants to go to Sanchez, how do we regulate if an individual board member just wants to go visit an individual school in their board capacity? Obviously not as a parent, but in their board capacity.
Well, I just think that there's an impact on that. Every time one of you shows up to the school, unannounced or announced, that has an impact on the leadership, it has an impact on the school. And so I have to manage that, right? And whether we like it or not, we need to know when we show up, it makes people nervous, right? People feel like they need to prepare. They're spending management time, precious time, catering to us, right? So I want to be able to make sure that things are accessible, and I think that I need to take the lead on scheduling school visits. That if we got into a habit where board members are saying, hey, I'm going to this school now, that would be really not great. I don't think it would be good for the running of our schools. It would be contradictory to some of the things that we're trying to do. So I just want to be really, really clear, right? If there's schools that the board wants to visit, or you want to be involved and get into schools, right? Again, as COVID protocols start to move away at some point, we can schedule those. But again, every time we spend time, we go up to the school, what you think you're going to see, you're not going to see because it's going to be prepared, right? And I think that's what you've known. And that's just human nature, right? Folks are going to put their best foot forward, right? That's just how it's going to be. Everywhere I've ever been, that's the case. Even when I show up, Kathleen shows up, anybody from our cabinet shows up, right? Let's hone in on the teacher roundtable. Let me reframe the conversation, teacher roundtable, and then just be really clear that as we, school visits need to be planned and coordinated. These aren't just things that we can pick up and do at any point in time.
So I'm just hoping that once we get through COVID, we can get into the groove of having more routine school visits, but we can put that in like the April timeframe to talk about. Because I agree with you, they're canned, but I also think they appreciate it when we show up. At least they say they do.
You're right, they say they do. And it's more work. I would just need to be really clear. It's more work every time that we have these official school visits, right? Or unofficial people start to worry. And I will tell you this, that I feel very lucky to work with all of you, and so do all of our, I don't ever let our team ever forget how lucky we are to have such a strong, competent, together board. So I just want to make sure that your surprise presence scares people. It just does. So.
Is anybody doing that? Just showing up
No.
at school?
No.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure though, Rob, that we're not saying we're not going to do school visits. We're just putting that off till we figure out what our COVID protocols are.
No. I'm not saying that we won't do school visits, but they'll have to be planned and coordinated through me.
Like they had been in the past.
Yes.
And that's a conversation we're going to have at a time that is not this, because what we're going to talk about now is teacher roundtable meetings, and Stacy's got a thought about that. Go.
So I think what would have been helpful with the school visit signups is to maybe put an expectation out there to each board member and say, please only pick 2 or something like that. I'm not attached to my BVSD email. I don't get notifications when they come. And so by the time I went to sign up, I had 1 and I couldn't make any of the others, and which is okay, it's fine. But I think maybe if we have something like this again in the future, just say, please sign up for 2, then see where you are, and then you can fill in the holes. I think that would have been a lot more fair. And I just think that would have worked.
Okay, excellent. All right, Lisa?
Yeah, 2 things. First, I maybe just wanted to say, since I think we have 2 folks who've never gone to a roundtable yet, is that right? 3? Okay. So maybe just a quick clarification, too, that this is an observational thing, not an interaction, that we're going entirely to sit and to be quiet and to listen, which I mentioned to say that I think there are certainly schools that maybe each of us is particularly interested in, but every school is valuable in that context, right? There's something to be learned anywhere. So maybe we should be worrying less about where folks want to go and just trying to get even numbers. And if there is some way to do that that also takes into account people's schedules, which is where I think it gets more complicated, particularly with those of us who are working full-time. I know it's a bit messy, but I think, yeah, just like Stacy's saying, there's something to be learned at every school. There's something interesting at every school. It's just an observational time to learn as much as we possibly can about what folks are going through and what their struggles are and what their successes have been. And as long as it's organized in a way where everybody has the opportunity to go to the same number, I don't think we need to overthink which schools those are.
Okay. Ooh, last week. Yep. Nicole?
I would add, I think because all of our schools have very unique cultures and climates, it would be helpful to see a wide variety of them and in different geographic areas and different. So I think the timing, we need to having a sign up for X amount that seems reasonable based on the timing that works with your schedule, and trying kind of long range to get a rotation of us through these different schools. Again, not to have the perception that, these schools are more valuable or less valuable, but to get an understanding of how all of our schools are different and what their different needs might be, because even some of their educational models are very different. So hearing those different perspectives, I think, can be valuable. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's what Kathy was getting at earlier too, right? That once we get back to school visits, that's an opportunity to make sure that everybody has a chance to see all of these different schools and experience all the different cultures outside of the roundtables as well.
Kathy?
And Rob, I don't know how to even ask this question, but is there some way at the end of all this you will be able to summarize what you're learning from it? Well, because it's the meat of what we do, and you're the person who should get it, but if there's highlights of things that you're learning and direction changes we should be making, then that would make me feel better not being at those meetings, knowing that you're going to roll it up into some kind of summary for us.
So after every meeting, I make changes. Right. Like, so I don't sit on the info. Like, so if I get to a school and I hear something that's happening, that comes directly to our team. I mean, what I do is I report out to cabinet, right, when we have the meetings, and then I start to direct action based on what I'm hearing, right? So there's a direct listening, then action model. I mean, so I have all the information. I'm happy to share that and summarize.
I don't want to get in the weeds. I'm just trying to figure out at some higher level if you could, because what you're doing I think is awesome. I mean, people feel listened to, and I feel comfortable that when there's something that you can change, you do. But at the board level, I don't know what it is. I'm trying to figure out what I should know. I'm not comfortable with 0, but I also don't need to know after every meeting what you did. So I'm struggling with where we would go with that, and I'm just asking for guidance on that.
Is it something like just where there are higher level issues or common issues across schools where you start to see, oh, this is a pattern of a thing, as opposed to just say, single case issue, maybe where you start to see cross-cutting stuff? That might be something to think about.
I think we can. I mean, it's also tricky too. I think that, I worry, and maybe this isn't an issue or not, but the confidentiality of some of the things that are shared, right? Like, because sometimes there's personnel actions that I have to take. Sometimes there's.
That's why what Heather said makes sense to me. I don't need to know. She's talking about high level, so take it up one more level. And so you've heard from 5 schools that you have to change, what do we call our management system, our access management system, and you're doing that, right? That's not going to breach anybody's confidentiality, but it lets us know there were issues that you're addressing it, and then we move on. So that's why I'm saying I don't think we need to know what you heard at a personal level, but it would be really helpful to know.
Like maybe like a weekly roll up in like our Friday report out. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would.
Aren't you already doing that weekly for cabinet, right? I mean, that's what we've heard at these. And I guess that's what I was going to suggest is if you want to just send the same information to us, a watered down, shortened version of whatever you're presenting to cabinet as your weekly takeaway, I think that would be the thing.
Yep, no, I could totally do that. I could take it up even a little bit higher because cabinet's sometimes real specific.
Okay.
Yep. But for those of you, they have been an amazing way to get to core of, here's what we're doing, here's how it's hitting the ground. And I know that that's information that's really important to board members, right, to see of how are we adjusting and shifting, right, to get the results we want. So.
And I think that, for me, addresses some of my concerns about not being at the meeting then, because I know that you're reporting out and we're all getting the common information. So I don't want to make this way more work for you, so I'm trying to figure out whatever you land on, Rob, I'm pretty sure we'll be comfortable with. Like I said, somewhere between 0 and 100 is where I think we'll be.
Well, we'll give it a go, and if it's not meeting your needs, you'll let me know, and I'll change.
Okay. Richard?
Well, I can't help but interact with teachers when I go to those meetings. And if I'm not going to be able to interact with them, I'm not going to go to those meetings. I'll just wait till you give the report.
Because these are observational, these in particular.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say hello and have small talk. It's another thing to start asking teachers questions, right, that would make them question what they're doing or not. But I think you do fine, Richard. I mean, I've been in the meetings with you. I mean, and if there's things where we're getting, in a place where we don't need, like, I haven't seen that as an issue at all.
Okay. So I'm back now on the original question, which is how shall we go around signing up for such things? What I heard is maybe set a number.
So here's what I've heard, and if this meets your needs, just let me know. I think I can wrap this up. Awesome. What I've heard is that, you don't, and here's what I'm thinking, right? I've heard that email is a limitation, right? So you can't have any system that depends upon who gets their email the quickest, gets some type of different access. Right, so maybe there's a different way we do it, where that isn't in play. We limit the like somebody can't sign up for all of them. We limit the number so there's more and more options. And then if we get to a point where everybody has an opportunity, there's still options available, right, then we do another, like, hey, you could sign up for another 2, and then we just kind of roll it out that way. I think we can work out a system that does that. And then, again, if there's any issues, just board members come to me directly, and we'll work through what we need to work through to course correct.
Lisa?
If the email thing's an issue, it might be easy to bring, we could go old school and just pass around at a board meeting,
That's
right?
what I was thinking.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. No. I was thinking that as well.
Yeah.
Scantron. I'll bring out some Scantrons. What do you think?
That'd be great. Fill in the bubbles. Oh, God, Scantrons. Man.
Pick a ping pong ball.
I mean, I think email works if you set the expectation, please only pick 2.
Right.
I think email still can work without going old school. But anyway.
No, I think you're right, Stacy.
Okay. So you'll set a limit on the at least on the first round to make sure everyone gets a minimum number. And then if there's extra, then by all means fill in with as your availability allows.
I think we have everything we need to come up with a system that folks are going to feel better about.
That sounds fantastic. Excellent. So you'll work on that.
So are we going to reschedule the roundtables again then? Or
I don't think that's, I'm thinking moving forward was the idea. Is that okay with it? Is everybody under that same agreement? All right. Okay.
And in the meantime, you could probably create some additional comfort just by providing some of those high-level summaries of what you're hearing so folks know what they might have missed.
As long as they're saying good things, that would probably...
And the superintendent's so smart and so handsome.
No, they won't be doing that.
Laura?
So the teacher roundtables will kind of circle back to graduations, which should we do the same similar thing? Except do one, sign up for one graduation first.
You and I, we'll take it offline.
Okay.
I think we'll be okay there.
Okay, thank
They
you.
got a plan. There's going to be a plan. Fantastic. All righty. I think we did the work that we set out to do on that topic, yeah? And I think we did the work that we set out to do on our other topics. So last call for last thoughts of things we'd like to discuss before we break. Yes, Stacy?
Yeah, I was under the impression that we were also going to talk about kind of email etiquette and who responds to what. What does it mean when you email individual board members? Who's responding on behalf of the board? All of those things.
Sweet. That wasn't on my list, but I'm delighted to have you talk about it. Kathleen, do you want to start by providing high-level guidance on what it means when board members send email to each other? I didn't mean to catch you on the spot
I
there.
think it's Stacy. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the topic to talk about is so there's some consistency amongst board members, right? So we get different types of emails. Sometimes we get emails to individual board members. Sometimes we get emails to the entire board, right? And then to the extent of what are we doing when that happens?
Right.
I know I've had conversations with board members on, is there a system or way that would help us to communicate to all board members when somebody else has responded? I think we're digging into that. I don't have an answer to that today, but it's, did I kind of?
That's part of it, but isn't there some law about emailing each individual board member separately or something? Like that's never been explained to me. Yeah.
Kathleen, got you covered.
Like I just would like to have a conversation about that because I don't think we've ever discussed that as a board when I've been on the board anyway.
What are the rules, Kathleen?
Sure. So you can actually have a board meeting by email if you discuss public business with 3 or more. So if a board member were to send a general email to everybody that says, this is what I think we should do at the next meeting, that's a problematic communication because of the volume of discussion that you're launching. It's also it's not if you're saying, here's something for us to consider at the next meeting. It could be a statement. The discussion piece is where the problem comes. It doesn't have to be in one email for it to be a problem. You can daisy chain, right? You could email, if a board member were to individually email, but still discuss public business and do it with 2 other board members, then once again, it's an open meeting under Colorado law. So you can have a conversation with another board member, one board member, but not to board members by email before you run afoul of that meeting law issue.
Does that help, Stacy?
Well,
then
and we've
the other
had that
piece-
violated in the past.
Yeah, and sometimes people do it unintentionally, all of a sudden, sort of like my speed limit when I'm on 36 going home. Sometimes you realize later you made a mistake. And one of the things that you can do is bring those emails forward to a public meeting. Hey, I want to talk about this. I emailed. It's sort of, but we do have good case law in Colorado that says we can cure open meetings violations. If we accidentally make a mistake and we self-correct, we can't be sued and have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. So it's an important piece if you find yourself in that circumstance.
Yeah, and then the other piece was what Rob was explaining about who takes responsibility for answering emails. I think Kathy has been, but we haven't discussed that. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to do that.
Kathy, do you want to jump in and say what you think it is that you do?
So there's one clear one and one not so clear one. If it says the BVS board, I respond unless Rob beats me to it. If it's an operational issue, Rob's pretty good at beating me to responding because I find myself sitting at the keyboard thinking, how am I going to respond to an operational issue? So that's what I do. Mostly it's the masks and telling us that kind of stuff, and I borrowed Tina's language. I read each one, I try to make it personal to them, but there is some cutting and pasting in some of the responses. So I respond to the BVS board ones. Now, where it's a little gray to me is sometimes people will say to me, but they're also individualizing it to everybody, and I have no way of knowing that. So I don't know how we are going to deal with that, because I think we're just going to get 7 different responses, because I think people feel like if it says just my name in there, I have to respond, even though it really could just be the whole board. It just doesn't, they don't do it by saying BVS board. Does that make sense, Kathleen? And I don't think there's any, I think we are all enough aligned that I'm not all that worried about it. I think there's probably other boards in the state where that might be a little more of a problem, but we're each allowed to respond if we want to. We can't say, oh, Kitty, you can't respond because it came to BVS board.
Right.
But I think it takes the pressure off, and as president, I do speak for the board in responding to that. Does that make sense to people? Is that right, Kathleen? I mean, that's been our practice in the past. Tina responded. And I didn't even necessarily when it came to me individually, because I just assumed I would check. And if Tina got it and I got it, I figured it went to the whole board.
Okay. Kathleen, and then Kitty.
I think that my experience from being at the Colorado Association of School Boards is that typically boards will say, we're going to designate the president to speak on behalf of the board when something is coming up between meetings and to work with the superintendent. If it's 2 individuals, everybody has their own style as to how they want to proceed. I think what you want to make clear is, I'm responding to you as one board member. I'm not committing the board. That's pretty clear when you sign it with your name and you say, I will consider. So I think it's just really important to make sure that you're not holding out as speaking for the entire board in that sort of correspondence.
Kitty?
Yeah, and I brought this up to Kathy too, because at the case concert, that would have been even more fun. At the case conference, one of the breakout sessions I was in, there was a panel, and one of the speakers was the president of a board, and she was talking about how she has to remind her board that only she can speak for the board and that they should not be answering emails that are sent to everybody. And I know that we have not been doing that. And so I would like to make sure that we are consistent in what we do. And lots of times we'll get emails where they'll say nobody has responded. And maybe it would be useful to put on the website, where people can go and click on BVS board, that the president will respond or something, so that they don't expect 7 people to respond to them.
Yep.
I like the idea of some sort of communication to our public that's what we're agreeing, is that if it's sent to the board, the expectation, you can expect the board president to respond. So there is some of that understanding of why aren't, how come I've only heard from one of you? Why aren't you, it's because that's sort of how we've decided to operate, and making sure the public is aware that that is our process, I think is important piece of transparency and accountability.
So Rob, what do you think about that? Putting something on the website clarifying which emails will be responded to by the president versus which emails might be responded to by individual board members, so people can manage their own expectations about what kind of response they may or may not receive?
Can I amend that?
Yes?
That it'll be responded to by either the board president or the
Or
superintendent?
the superintendent? Yep.
Because there are ones that Rob really can respond to much better than I can
Great.
because they're operational. So I just wanted to say that so that they don't feel like I'm going to respond to an operational one and go down some rabbit hole of things I don't know anything about.
But to be clear, we're agreeing that that's an at least, not an only, right? Okay.
Rob, what do you think about that idea?
Well, I don't think it'll solve the issue. I think you'll still get people who said they haven't heard from folks. I think that that's what's going to happen. I don't think that people are going to look to the website and see that. But I'm happy to do that. And there's also times when I get emails and I don't respond directly. I forward it to staff and tell them to note my referral, right? Which, sometimes you all can do as well, right? Hello, constituent, Kitty sent me your email, let me respond, and I copy on behalf. So, I think that that's another tactic. So, when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, I've tried to pick up these tips where I'm not like send it to somebody and saying, hey, I sent to somebody. Sometimes there's tactics you can do. I don't know that I think that you're going to get people who say they never heard from anybody, and I think there's going to be people who have heard from people who say they're not going to do that as well, to try to deeper engage on a topic that they really want to make a point on. But I'm happy to work with Randy and put it on the website if the board thinks that would be helpful.
Kathy?
So Rob, I think what I would request though is if a board member says, talk to your principal, that you should get copied on that. So anytime an individual board member makes a statement like that should go to your principal or here's the process, that you get copied on that. I hate to flood your inbox, but I think you need to know if we're making
that's
referrals.
Not flooding, that's keeping me in the loop. So, so you all know, if cabinet member, principal, whomever, right, I take those notes and I put them on our weekly check-ins to follow up with my team to make sure things are doing okay. So that's a piece of information that helps me as I'm checking in on a weekly basis with my direct reports to know and understand that folks are following up and following through. So it's not flooding my inbox. It's incredibly helpful.
Lisa, did you have a thing?
I had a separate thing. I was just asking Kathy, and she was saying if we're getting tired, we could talk about it tonight or we could talk about it tomorrow. But I was interested in discussing bumping everything up by an hour to look at starting special meetings at 4 and regular meetings at 5.
Okay. Hold off on that while I summarize just where we are in emails. Anything else on emailing? Go ahead, Kathy.
No, let Kathleen go.
I just wanted to say, when it is an email about a legal matter, like I'm suing you or you're liable for something that fell on my kid's car, I always respond to those on behalf of the board. The complaints that we got that reference Nuremberg and all that stuff, I always say I am responding on behalf of the board. And I do try and make sure the board knows that.
So I would think the same caveat would apply. If we see something that even hints of legal, we copy you and Rob. And what people need to understand is that by copying Kathleen, that at least affords it some protection of privilege sometimes.
Sometimes, okay.
Which is sometimes helpful.
Stacy, did this answer all of your questions or create more questions?
I have one more.
Yep.
When Lisa and I started, 2 years ago, whenever it was made clear to us that when we get an email or we have a question about something, that everything filters through Rob, that we're not to email, Robin. And if we email Robin, you have to be copied. Is that still the case? Is that still the practice? And that, individual board members shouldn't be emailing staff without keeping you in the loop?
That's what I prefer, if everybody's okay with that, and then it's just a quick handoff, and then we'll get you what you need. Again, it just helps me follow up and keep on top of the things that are happening, and it helps me follow up with my check-ins.
Okay. All right. Kitty.
I was just going to say, and yeah, it can be problematic if a board member, an individual board member, and a staff member are communicating, and the superintendent doesn't know.
I always know.
Yeah, but I mean, if you
Because
don't.
if you're communicating with a staff member, they tell me.
Right, but we need, I mean, it could
It gets
become
messy
a problem.
really fast. It gets messy really fast. All right. Okay. Any other questions on email? Fantastic. And Rob, just the one action item there was just working to get who will respond to what on the website, just in case it
We can
heads
work it
off.
right in our chain of command
Yep.
information.
Cool.
Well, and we're going to have cleaned up signature blocks. That's an email.
Yeah, I had that as a separate action item, but yes, thank you. That does relate to email. Yep. Awesome. Kathleen's got that one. Okay. Yep. So talk about moving up meetings and anything else, Richard?
I just have one more priority item that I failed to mention earlier, and I don't know whether it's on that board or not, but community partnerships.
June 14th.
Fantastic. Okay. So the other item that we want to discuss, Lisa just mentioned about changing timing of meetings. It is 8:30. Do you want to crank through one more and not have to come tomorrow night, or are you getting too sleepy and want to do tomorrow? Do it now? All right, hit it, Lisa.
Maybe I can just add, I think part of it is about our equal school day change, that before we had folks getting out of school at 3:30 or 4 or 4:30, so starting special meetings at 5 and regular meetings at 6 made sense, but now everybody's getting out of school at 2:50. So yeah, I think it would be great to start special meetings at 4, regular meetings at 5. Sometimes we get out of here in just a couple hours, but for those meetings that run super late, it would be a lot easier if our latest possible night was 9 or 9:30 instead of 10 or 10:30, and if we were counting on 8 on average.
Thoughts on that, Stacy?
It's fine with me, but I wonder if, based on our other conversation about public comment, if 5 p.m. is too early for people because they're just getting out of work. Just a thought. I'm fine with it, but we might want to consider that. I don't know.
It might be the case. I think that's part of the conversation we should have. I would point out that while there are certainly some people who use after-school care, that I think there are a lot of parents who are picking their kids up from school at 3 and getting home afterwards, and that making sure people can get to bed at a reasonable hour and get their kids up at 6 the next morning for school is sort of maybe the competing argument. I know it's tough. You guys know my kids are running around here. They're exhausted.
Nicole, what are your thoughts?
So both of my kids go to school that do not have the early start times. So my elementary schooler gets out at 3:35 and my middle schooler gets out at 3:20. I couldn't probably get from where I live here by 4 p.m. and concern about our working families and their ability to provide public comment if we have that sooner than 5.
Okay. Other thoughts? Kathy?
Don't our high schools get out at like 3:45? So it's trying to balance that I think is challenging too.
Do we have to have an earlier start time for special meetings? Can we just do a 5 o'clock across the board start, whether we're doing special, exec, or regular, and just update it on the week?
What about that? 5 o'clock always? Anyone have a thought? Pro, con, somewhere in between? Beth, you're nodding that you're fine with that?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. I was, before she said that, thinking, oh, maybe we should do 4:30, but then it just seems like, almost like splitting hairs. Yeah, sounds good.
Kathy, thoughts on 5 o'clock across the board?
Nicole, does that help if
it's always 5?
I think that's helpful for my childcare needs.
Well, but you kind of reflect a demographic that I don't have kids in school anymore, and I'm trying to figure out what's realistic for picking up kids after school activities and still getting here.
Right, and the after-school activities component is a whole nother beast. And I would also add that for our public, that might be confusing if they're expecting to tune in at 5 p.m. every time, and sometimes 5 p.m. is a work session, sometimes 5 p.m. is a superintendent's report. That could be a challenge also.
Well, we could always let all three of
That's what I was going to say, that it may be confusing for the public if sometimes it's at 5 and sometimes it's not.
Lisa?
Oh, no, I agree that's the concern. I mean, I think we could update online. I don't know that we have so many people watching. It's a huge deal. But, I mean, I'm open to whatever folks want to land on. I guess I'm just pointing out that for me and for anybody else with little kids, it's tough to get up at 6 after staying up until 10 or 11.
Okay. Kitty, did you have a thought on this one? Nope. Richard, do you have a thought on this one? Okay. I heard lots of options, but I didn't hear a lot of convergence around anyone in particular. Does that mean no change, or do you want to start all the things at 5? Kathy?
I just have a question to avoid the confusion. So if we have a work session, it starts at 5. We have a regular meeting, it starts at 5. We just hope people pay attention to the website. Is that what we're saying?
It sounds complicated.
Well, we have a work session every meeting.
Oh. Hold on. Rob was just pointing out you have a work session at every meeting?
Those would be the green boxes.
So you're always having those?
But we're not always, like, we're not tomorrow.
But we have a lot of them.
90% of the time, we have a work session prior to a regular meeting.
All right, just feels like we're showing up here at 6 o'clock a lot lately, but
You
Lisa,
could
I'd
all
like to-
agree not to use adjectives and then cut an hour off every meeting. I'm just saying.
we could all speak much more quickly. I mean, there are many options.
I don't know that we could speak more quickly than you, Lisa. You're pretty good.
We're just being sassy now because we're sleepy. Go ahead,
I was
Kathy.
just going to say, let's just leave it. I don't want it to close the door on it. I think we should revisit this maybe when we see how we're doing, because we haven't had a regular set of work sessions and regular meetings for a while. And I don't want to close the door on it for Lisa, so maybe we could just revisit this conversation, Rob, like in April or something when we.
I think that's fine. I think we could also look at whenever we're setting up the next calendar for the
Yeah.
next school year. If we're going to have those later starts, it's always easier when the day ends later, right? When we're looking at summertime and spring and early fall, it's much easier to have those late meetings. So maybe we can try and stack work sessions through the winter months and
Okay.
have those later meetings when we get out of here and it's light and 70 degrees instead of an ice storm.
It could
Do
be
you have thoughts on
actually
that?
pretty problematic once our meetings are in person again. People would be coming at 5, whether or not there's a meeting. Like that could be really problematic once we're in person.
Okay. Okay. So for now, hold it, and then you can revisit it in April, and maybe revisit it when you go back to all in person. I think you have lots of opportunity to see how it goes and adapt as needed. But for now, keep on keeping on. Okay. Is there anything else that you all would like to discuss? Kathy?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Fantastic conversation. Rob, do you have anything else for the board to discuss tonight?
Proud to work with this team. I thought we dug in a lot of really big topics today and got through them, I think, incredibly gracefully and collaboratively. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Folks, pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to see you again. Look forward to looking at what you do out of all the things that came out of tonight and going forward. We're officially adjourned unless Kathy has to officially adjourn us. There you go.